A crime called motherhood. In 1877, Buckskin, Arizona, a woman was beaten unconscious, not for stealing, not for lying, but for giving birth to a daughter. Her crime? Being a mother to girls. Her sentence? A lifetime of bruises and shame, but one stranger's defiance would ignite a revolution that shattered the chains of an entire town. This is the story of Evelyn Pierce, the woman who turned her greatest shame into her proudest legacy. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The desert wind carried no mercy that October night in 1877. It howled through the crooked streets of Buckskin, Arizona, rattling the shutters of saloons and boarding houses, sweeping dust across the wooden planks that served as sidewalks. In a town where justice was measured in bullets and morality in whiskey, nobody paid much attention to the screams coming from the shack at the edge of town. They'd heard them before. They'd hear them again. Inside that shack, Evelyn Pierce knelt on the dirt floor, her body trembling, her nightgown soaked through with sweat and blood. The midwife, a gray-haired woman named Martha Clemens, worked by candlelight, her weathered hands steady even as her face creased with worry. "Push now, child," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Just one more. You're almost there." Evelyn gritted her teeth, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. She'd done this twice before. Twice she'd endured this agony. Twice she'd brought life into a world that seemed determined to crush it. Her hands clutched the edge of a wooden crate, splinters digging into her palms as she bore down with everything she had left. And then, a cry. Thin and fragile, but unmistakably alive. Martha moved quickly, wrapping the newborn in a threadbare blanket. For a moment, the midwife's expression softened as she looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. Then her eyes lifted to Evelyn, and something like sorrow flickered there. "It's a girl," Martha said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She reached out with shaking hands, and Martha placed the baby against her chest. The infant's warmth seeped through the thin fabric of her nightgown, and for one precious moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, mother and daughter, breathing in sync. "She's beautiful," Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's so beautiful." Behind the door that separated the main room from the sleeping alcove, two small faces peered through the gap. Sarah, 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's sharp chin, and little Margaret, barely 5, clutching her older sister's hand with white-knuckled terror. They'd been through this before, too. They knew what came next. Martha gathered her supplies with practiced efficiency, her movements quick and purposeful. "I'll be going now," she said, not quite meeting Evelyn's eyes. "You rest. Keep the baby warm." "Martha," Evelyn's voice cracked. "Please, don't tell him yet. Just give me tonight. Just one night." The midwife's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked as though she might refuse. Then she gave a single sharp nod. "I'll take the long way home," she said. "But Evelyn, you know I can't protect you from what's coming." The door creaked shut behind her, and the shack fell silent except for the baby's soft mewling and the relentless wind outside. Evelyn pulled her daughter closer, pressing her lips to the infant's forehead. She breathed in the smell of her, milk and copper, and something indefinably sweet. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." Sarah crept out from behind the door, Margaret following close behind. They moved like ghosts, their bare feet silent on the dirt floor. Sarah's eyes were too old for her age, haunted by things no child should have witnessed. "Mama?" she whispered. Is it another girl?" Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Margaret began to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs that she tried desperately to muffle with her hands. Sarah wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, her small face set in grim determination. "It's going to be bad this time, ain't it?" Sarah said. It wasn't really a question. Before Evelyn could answer, the sound of heavy boots on the wooden steps outside sent ice through her veins. The door crashed open, slamming against the wall with such force that dust rained down from the rafters. Caleb Pierce stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the night sky. He'd been drinking. The sour stench of whiskey rolled off him in waves, mixing with the smell of sweat and tobacco. "Well?" His voice was a low growl, dangerous and unpredictable. What is it? Evelyn clutched the baby tighter, instinctively trying to shield her with her body. Caleb, please. I asked you a question, woman. He took a step inside, his boots thundering against the floorboards. His eyes were bloodshot, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. Boy or girl? The silence stretched out like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. Girl, Evelyn finally whispered. For a heartbeat, Caleb stood perfectly still. Then his face contorted into something inhuman, a mask of pure fury that made Evelyn's daughter shrink back into the shadows. A girl, he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper more terrifying than any shout. Another goddamn girl. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. Evelyn barely had time to turn away before his hand connected with the side of her head, the impact sending stars exploding across her vision. She crumpled to her knees, somehow managing to keep the baby cradled against her chest, even as pain radiated through her skull. 3 times, Caleb roared, his spit flying. 3 times I waited, and 3 times you give me nothing but useless daughters. What kind of woman are you? What kind of curse did I marry? He kicked her in the ribs, and Evelyn's breath left her lungs in a rush. She curled around the baby, her back taking the brunt of his boot as it came down again and again. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear Margaret screaming, could hear Sarah begging their father to stop. Shut up! Caleb backhanded Sarah across the face, sending the girl sprawling. This is your mother's fault. She's the one who can't give me a son. She's the one who's shaming this family. Blood ran hot down Evelyn's temple, dripping onto the dirt floor. Each breath felt like broken glass in her lungs. But still, she held onto the baby, her arms locked around the tiny body with a strength that came from somewhere beyond physical endurance. Please, she gasped. Please, Caleb. She's just a baby. She didn't choose. That's the problem. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back so violently she felt something pop in her neck. None of you chose, but I'm stuck with you. 3 daughters. Do you know what that means? Do you know how the men laugh at me in the saloon? Poor Caleb Pierce, they say, can't even make a son. What kind of man is he? His fist came down on her face, and Evelyn felt her lips split, tasted copper flooding her mouth. The world tilted sideways. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Worthless, Caleb spat, releasing her hair. She collapsed onto the floor, her body curling protectively around the baby. All of you. Worthless. He turned and stumbled toward the door, pausing in the threshold. Don't expect me back tonight, he slurred. I can't stand the sight of you. The door slammed shut behind him, and for a long moment the only sound was Margaret's broken sobbing and the baby's frightened wails. Sarah crawled to her mother's side, her small hands hovering uncertainly over Evelyn's battered body. Mama, please get up. Evelyn forced her eyes open, though the effort sent fresh waves of pain through her skull. Blood pooled beneath her cheek, warm and sticky. Every breath was agony. But the baby was still moving against her chest, still crying, still alive. I'm okay, Evelyn lied through swollen lips. Help me sit up, sweetheart. With Sarah's help, she managed to lever herself into a sitting position, her back against the wall. Margaret rushed over, tears streaming down her face, and pressed herself against her mother's side. Evelyn wrapped her free arm around both girls, pulling them close. Listen to me, she whispered, her voice rough and broken. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. You hear me? Sarah nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She'd heard these words before, after every beating, and nothing ever changed. Evelyn looked down at the newborn in her arms. The baby had quieted, her tiny fist curled against Evelyn's chest, her eyes, impossibly dark and deep, staring up at her mother with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. What are we going to name her? Margaret asked softly. Evelyn's throat tightened. In the chaos and pain, she'd almost forgotten that this tiny creature deserved a name, deserved an identity beyond another girl. Grace, she whispered. Her name is Grace. Because if there was one thing they all needed now, it was grace. The grace to survive, the grace to endure, the grace to hope that somehow, someday, things might be different. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, her daughters keeping watch beside her. Sarah tore strips from an old petticoat and used them to clean her mother's wounds, her small hands surprisingly steady. Margaret sang softly, a lullaby their grandmother had taught them, back before she'd died, and left them alone with Caleb. Dawn was still hours away when the sound of wagon wheels crunching over gravel made them all freeze. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Had Caleb come back already? Was he bringing friends, witnesses to her failure? But the footsteps that approached the door were different, measured, purposeful, lacking the aggressive stomp of Caleb's boots. A knock came, soft but firm. "Mrs. Pierce?" The voice was male but gentle, carrying a quality Evelyn couldn't quite place. Concern, maybe, or pity. "Ma'am, my name is Samuel Graves. Martha Clemens sent me. She's worried about you and your girls." Evelyn tried to respond, but her voice came out as little more than a croak. Sarah moved to the door, her hand on the latch, looking back at her mother for permission. "Don't," Evelyn whispered, terror flooding through her. "Don't open it. Men don't help women like me. They only make things worse." "Mama, we have to try," Sarah said, her voice carrying a desperation that broke Evelyn's heart. "We can't keep going like this. We just can't." Before Evelyn could protest further, Sarah lifted the latch and cracked the door open. Through the gap, Evelyn caught a glimpse of a man's silhouette, tall and lean, with a hat held respectfully in his hands. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to paint the horizon, casting everything in shades of deep blue and gray. "Please," Samuel Graves said, and something in his voice made Evelyn's protest die in her throat. "I'm not here to judge or to interfere. Martha said you might need help, and I have a wagon and a ranch about 5 miles from here where nobody would bother you. Not tonight, anyway." "Why?" The word escaped Evelyn's lips before she could stop it. "Why would you help us?" Through the narrow opening, she saw Samuel's shoulders rise and fall in a slow breath. "Because I had a daughter once," he said quietly, "and a wife. And I lost them both to fever 3 years back. And every day since, I've wondered what the world might have been like if someone had been there to help them when they needed it most." Silence fell between them, broken only by the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. "My husband," Evelyn began. "Your husband rode off toward the saloons an hour ago," Samuel interrupted gently. "I passed him on my way into town. He won't even know you're gone until morning, if then. And by the time he sobers up enough to care, well, you could be somewhere safe." Sarah looked back at her mother, her eyes pleading. Margaret had stopped crying, her attention fixed on the stranger at the door with a mixture of hope and fear. Evelyn's mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to stay, to endure as she always had. Strange men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Everyone knew that. And yet, she looked down at Grace, sleeping fitfully in her arms. She looked at Sarah's bruised cheek, at Margaret's tear-stained face. She thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the endless days of violence and shame that stretched out before them like a road leading nowhere but suffering. "If birthing daughters shames a man," Samuel said, his voice carrying through the crack in the door like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, "then I'll raise them proud, every last one." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow, not of pain, but of something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. "Give me 5 minutes," she whispered. "Just 5 minutes to gather our things." She saw Samuel nod through the gap in the door. "I'll ready the wagon, ma'am. Take your time." Sarah closed the door and turned to her mother, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are we really leaving?" "I don't know if we should," Evelyn admitted, struggling to her feet with Margaret's help. Every movement sent fresh pain lancing through her body, but she forced herself upright. "I don't know if this is right or if it's madness, but I know I can't watch him hurt you girls anymore. I can't." They moved quickly, gathering what little they owned, a few clothes, a tin cup, the quilt Evelyn's mother had made. Margaret found her one treasured possession, a carved wooden horse that her grandfather had given her before he died. Sarah clutched a book of prayers that the traveling preacher had gifted her last summer. Evelyn wrapped Grace in the cleanest blanket they had and held her close. "If this stranger means us harm," she whispered to her daughters, "we run. You understand? You run, and you don't look back. Promise me." Both girls nodded solemnly. When they emerged from the shack, the sky had lightened to a deep purple, stars still visible but fading fast. Samuel stood beside a sturdy-looking wagon, his horse, a patient-eyed roan, already hitched and ready. In the growing light, Evelyn could see him more clearly, a man in his mid-30s, with weathered skin and kind eyes. He wore simple clothes, clean but well worn, and his hat bore the sweat stains of honest work. He took one look at Evelyn's battered face, and his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he simply stepped forward and held out his arms. "Let me help you up," he said. "You look like you can barely stand." Evelyn hesitated, then allowed him to support her elbow as she climbed into the wagon bed. The girls scrambled up after her, Sarah pulling Margaret close. Samuel had laid out blankets and even a pillow, small comforts that felt impossibly luxurious. "There's water in that canteen," he said, pointing to a leather container hanging from the wagon's side. "And some cornbread wrapped in cloth. It's not much, but it'll hold you till we get to the ranch." He climbed onto the driver's seat and took up the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Buckskin began to recede behind them. Evelyn watched the shack grow smaller and smaller, half expecting Caleb to come roaring out of the darkness to drag her back into that hell she'd called home for 8 long years. But the streets remained empty. The only witnesses to their departure were the stars overhead and the wind that whispered through the sage. "Where's your ranch?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the wheels. "Beyond the ridge," Samuel called back. "It's not much, just a small house and some land. I raise horses mostly, sell them to the cavalry fort when they're ready. It's quiet, peaceful, a good place for children to grow up." Sarah leaned against her mother's shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking her fear. Margaret had already fallen asleep, her head pillowed on the quilt. Only Evelyn remained awake, her eyes fixed on the horizon as the sun began its slow climb into the sky. She'd left everything she'd ever known behind. Her home, however terrible. Her husband, however cruel. The life she'd built, however broken. And for what? The word of a stranger? The slim hope that somewhere in this harsh desert, kindness might actually exist? But as Grace stirred in her arms, letting out a small, sleepy sound, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite peace. She was too raw for that, too damaged. But perhaps the first fragile seed of it, the possibility that her daughters might grow up without fear, that they might learn their worth not from a man's fists, but from a man's respect. It was a foolish hope, probably, a desperate woman's fantasy. But for the first time in years, Evelyn Pierce dared to hope anyway. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the wagon following a winding trail that cut through rocky outcroppings and stands of juniper. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Samuel never once looked back, never questioned his decision to help them. He simply drove, humming a tune that Evelyn didn't recognize but found oddly comforting. When they finally crested the ridge, Evelyn sat up straighter, her breath catching in her throat. Below them, nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it, stood a house. Not a shack, a real house, with glass windows and a proper door and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Behind it stood a barn and several corrals where horses grazed in the morning light. Cottonwood trees lined the creek, their leaves already turning gold with the changing season. It looked like something out of a dream or a fairy tale, too good to be real. "This is your home?" she whispered. Samuel nodded, guiding the wagon down the slope. "Built it with my own hands," he said, and there was quiet pride in his voice. "My wife, Anna, she picked out where every window should go. Said she wanted to be able to see the sunrise from the kitchen and the sunset from the bedroom. She would have liked you and your girls, I think. She always wanted a house full of children." They pulled up in front of the porch, and Samuel set the brake. He climbed down and turned to help Evelyn, but she was already struggling to her feet, determined to do it herself. Her legs nearly gave out when her boots hit the ground, but she caught herself against the wagon's side, her pride refusing to let her fall. Sarah and Margaret tumbled out after her, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. Margaret pointed at the creek, then at the horses, her mouth forming a perfect O of wonder. Can we go look?" she asked hesitantly, as though expecting to be told no, to be punished for even asking. "Later," Evelyn said gently. First, we need to get inside and— Go ahead, Samuel interrupted. He smiled at Margaret, the expression transforming his weathered face. The creek's shallow this time of year and the horses are friendly. Just don't get too close to the gray one. He's got a habit of trying to nibble on hair. Margaret looked to her mother for permission. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Stay where I can see you. The two girls ran off toward the water, their laughter, genuine laughter, not the nervous, frightened kind, floating back on the morning breeze. Evelyn watched them go, something painfully tight loosening in her chest. Come on, Samuel said. Let's get you settled. You look like you're about to fall over. He was right. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion crashed over Evelyn like a wave. She let him guide her up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable chairs positioned nearby. A kitchen area occupied the back, complete with a cast-iron stove and a hand pump for water. Shelves lined the walls, holding books and tools and small mementos. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something indefinably masculine but not unpleasant. There's a bedroom through that door, Samuel said, pointing. You and the girls can take it. I'll sleep in the barn. The barn? Evelyn repeated, startled. But this is your home. We can't— You can, and you will, Samuel said firmly but gently. You need rest, and you need privacy. Besides, I've slept in worse places. The barn's got a decent loft, and it'll do me just fine. He crossed to a trunk by the fireplace and pulled out several quilts, handing them to Evelyn. These belong to my wife. She'd want them used. And there's a basin and pitcher in the bedroom if you want to wash up. I'll give you some privacy. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. Mrs. Pierce, I meant what I said earlier. You're safe here, as long as you need. No expectations, no obligations, just safety. Evelyn stood frozen in the middle of the room, clutching the quilts to her chest, baby Grace beginning to fuss against her shoulder. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she'd stopped being able to afford years ago. Why? She asked again, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, focused on something she couldn't see. Because someone should have helped Anna when she needed it, he finally said. Someone should have been there when the fever took her and our daughter, and they weren't. And I've carried that guilt every day since. Maybe I can't save everyone, but I can save you, if you'll let me. He stepped outside before she could respond, pulling the door shut behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the quiet house, her daughter's laughter drifting through the open windows, the weight of a stranger's kindness pressing down on her shoulders like a blessing she didn't know how to accept. She walked slowly to the bedroom, pushed open the door with her hip. Inside, she found a real bed. Not a pallet on the floor, but an actual bed with a frame and a mattress stuffed with something soft. The basin Samuel had mentioned sat on a washstand with a clean towel folded beside it. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, and the moment her weight settled onto that soft surface, something inside her broke. The tears came in great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She bent over Grace, her tears falling onto the baby's blanket, and wept for everything she'd endured, for every bruise and every harsh word, for every night she'd lain awake wondering if Caleb would kill her in her sleep. But she also wept for something new, something terrifying and fragile, and almost too painful to name. Hope. Outside, she could hear Samuel moving around, unhitching the horse, speaking to the animals in that same gentle voice he'd used with her daughters. Through the wall came the sound of him settling into the barn, and then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the soft strains of a guitar. He was playing a melody she didn't know, slow and sweet and melancholy, and beneath the music she heard his voice, singing words she could barely make out. There's a star that shines through the darkest night, that never fades, that never dies. And though the storms may rage and fight, that star still burns in endless skies. Evelyn closed her eyes, clutching Grace to her chest, and listened. Sarah and Margaret must have heard it too, because their laughter faded into silence, replaced by the quiet sounds of them returning to the house, their footsteps soft on the wooden floor. They slipped into the bedroom, wet from the creek, smelling of fresh air and freedom, and climbed onto the bed beside their mother. Sarah wrapped her arms around Evelyn from one side, Margaret from the other, and together they lay there, four females who'd been called worthless, listening to a stranger sing them a song about a star that never went out. "Mama?" Margaret whispered. "Are we going to stay here?" Evelyn stroked her daughter's hair, her hand trembling. "I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know." "I hope we do," Sarah said quietly. "I hope we can stay forever." Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't promise them forever. She couldn't promise them anything except this moment, this one perfect moment of safety and warmth and the sound of a man's voice singing not in anger, but in hope. But maybe, she thought as her eyes finally drifted closed, maybe one moment was enough to start with. Maybe one moment could become two. And maybe, just maybe, those moments could add up to something resembling a life. Outside, Samuel Graves continued to play his guitar, his weathered fingers moving across the strings with practiced ease. He sang about stars and storms and the quiet courage it took to keep going when everything told you to quit. He sang for the woman and children sleeping in his house, for the wife and daughter he'd lost, for every broken soul trying to find their way through the darkness. And in the growing light of that Arizona morning, his music floated across the valley like a prayer, or perhaps a promise, that somewhere in this harsh, unforgiving world, kindness could still exist. That somewhere, somehow, broken things could be made whole again. The sun climbed higher, spilling golden light through the bedroom window, and across the quilt where Evelyn and her daughters lay tangled together like shipwreck survivors clinging to a raft. Evelyn woke first, her body stiff and aching, every bruise announcing itself with fresh insistence. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, the softness of the mattress beneath her, the clean smell of cotton and cedar, the absence of Caleb's angry breathing beside her. Then it all came rushing back. The wagon, the stranger, the impossible kindness that felt more like a trap she hadn't yet sprung. Grace stirred against her chest, making small, hungry sounds. Evelyn sat up carefully, trying not to wake Sarah and Margaret, who were still lost in the deep sleep of exhausted children. Through the window, she could see Samuel moving between the barn and one of the corrals, leading a chestnut mare by a rope halter. He moved with quiet confidence, his gestures economical and sure. She watched him for a long moment, searching for signs of the darkness she knew must lurk beneath his surface. All men had it, that capacity for cruelty, for violence, for turning kindness into currency that demanded repayment. Caleb had been sweet once too, in the beginning. He'd brought her wildflowers and called her beautiful and promised her a life of comfort and respect. Those promises had lasted exactly as long as it took to say wedding vows and close the bedroom door. Grace's fussing grew more insistent, pulling Evelyn back to the present. She needed to feed her daughter, to clean herself up, to figure out what came next. One step at a time. That was all she could manage. One breath, one moment, one decision at a time. She rose from the bed, wincing as her ribs protested. In the morning light, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror hanging on the wall and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her left eye had swollen nearly shut, the skin around it a deep purple black. Her lip was split and crusted with dried blood. Bruises mottled her neck like ugly flowers blooming under her skin. "Mama?" Sarah's voice was small and uncertain. "Are you okay?" Evelyn turned, forcing a smile that pulled at her damaged lip. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just sore. Help me with your sister, will you?" Together they changed Grace's soiled cloth and got her settled to nurse. Margaret woke slowly, rubbing her eyes and looking around the unfamiliar room with wonder rather than fear. A small miracle in itself. "Is this real?" Margaret whispered. "Or are we dreaming?" "I don't know yet," Evelyn admitted, stroking her daughter's hair. "But let's find out together." They emerged from the bedroom to find the main room flooded with sunlight. Someone, Samuel obviously, had built up the fire in the stove and left a pot of coffee warming. Beside it sat a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and when Sarah lifted the corner, she gasped. "Mama, look! Eggs and bacon and biscuits! Real biscuits!" Evelyn's throat tightened. When was the last time her daughters had eaten a proper breakfast? Caleb spent his money on whiskey and gambling, leaving them to survive on cornmeal mush and whatever vegetables she could coax from the hard-packed dirt behind their shack. We can't just take his food, Evelyn said, though her stomach cramped with hunger. Why not? Margaret asked, her hand already reaching for a biscuit. He left it for us, didn't he? Before Evelyn could answer, a knock came at the door, gentle, respectful. Samuel's voice carried through the wood. Mrs. Pierce, I'm heading out to check the fence line. I'll be gone most of the morning. Please help yourselves to breakfast. There's milk in the cold box out back if the girls want some. Evelyn moved to the door, cracking it open. Samuel stood on the porch, hat in hand, his eyes carefully averted from her battered face. Mr. Graves, she began. Samuel, he corrected gently, and you don't need to thank me. Just eat. Get your strength back. We can talk later if you want, or not at all. Whatever you need. He settled his hat back on his head and started down the porch steps. Evelyn watched him go, confusion and suspicion warring with something that felt dangerously like gratitude. Mr. Graves. Samuel, she called after him. He paused, turning back. Why don't you ask? Why you don't demand to know what happened, or what I'm planning, or anything? Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady and surprisingly gentle. Because I figure you'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't, and that's fine too. A person's story is theirs to share or keep, Mrs. Pierce. I learned that the hard way. He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute and continued toward the barn, leaving Evelyn standing in the doorway with Grace in her arms and 1,000 questions she couldn't quite form into words. The girls fell on the breakfast like starving wolves, and Evelyn couldn't bring herself to stop them. She ate more slowly, each bite an exercise in pain as her split lip protested. But the food was good. Better than good. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, the biscuits light and fluffy. Someone who could cook like this had learned from a woman's hand, she thought. His wife, probably. The ghost who still haunted this house in the form of quilts and recipes and empty spaces. After breakfast, Evelyn cleaned up while the girls explored the house with growing confidence. They discovered Samuel's bookshelf, a luxury beyond imagining, and Sarah pulled down a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, her eyes going wide. Mama, can I read this? Do you think he'd mind? I don't think so, Evelyn said, but we'll ask when he comes back. Margaret found something even more precious, a wooden box filled with drawing charcoal and paper. She held up a stick of charcoal like it was made of gold. For drawing? Real drawing paper? Evelyn's heart ached. Her daughters were so hungry for beauty, for learning, for anything beyond the grim survival that had defined their lives, and she'd been unable to give them any of it. Let's wait and ask, she said again, though it killed her to see Margaret's face fall. The morning stretched on, marked by the sound of the creek outside and the occasional whinny of horses. Evelyn bathed herself and the baby as best she could with the basin water, trying to clean away the evidence of last night's violence. But some stains went deeper than skin, and she knew the bruises on her soul would take far longer to fade than the ones on her face. She was hanging wet cloths to dry on the porch railing when she heard the wagon returning. Samuel drove up with another man beside him, older, with a gray beard and the bearing of someone used to authority. Evelyn's first instinct was to grab her daughters and run, but something in Samuel's calm demeanor stopped her. Mrs. Pierce, Samuel called as he set the brake. This is Doc Matheson. I thought maybe he could take a look at you and the baby. Make sure everything's healing proper. The doctor climbed down, medical bag in hand. He had kind eyes, she noticed, and gentle hands that moved with the certainty of long practice. No need to be frightened, ma'am, Doc Matheson said. Samuel told me you had a rough night. I just want to make sure there's no serious damage that needs tending. Evelyn looked between them, trying to read the situation. Was this a trap? Had Samuel reported her to the authorities? Would they send her back to Caleb, back to that shack, and the endless cycle of violence? I don't have money to pay you, she said, her voice harder than she intended. Didn't ask for any, the doctor replied. Now, can we go inside? Or would you prefer I examine you out here where God and everyone can watch? The gentle sarcasm in his tone was so unexpected that Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. She led them inside, where Sarah immediately positioned herself between her mother and the strange man, her small body rigid with protective tension. Samuel noticed and knelt down to the girl's eye level. Sarah, is it? He asked. She nodded warily. How about you help me with something in the barn? I've got a new foal that could use some checking on, and I suspect you've got a gentle touch with animals. Sarah looked to her mother for permission. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Take Margaret with you. When the girls had gone, Doc Matheson set his bag on the table and gestured for Evelyn to sit. His examination was thorough but impersonal, his touch clinical. He checked her ribs, looked at her eyes, examined the cut on her lip and the bruises on her neck. Nothing broken, he finally announced, though you came damn close with these ribs. You're going to hurt for a good while longer, but time will heal it. The baby? Evelyn handed Grace over, watching anxiously as the doctor examined her newborn daughter with the same careful attention. After a few minutes, he smiled. Healthy as a horse, he declared. Good color, good reflexes. Whatever happened last night, you protected her well. Something in Evelyn's chest loosened slightly. And you won't tell anyone where we are? Doc Matheson's expression hardened. Mrs. Pierce, I took an oath to do no harm. That includes keeping my mouth shut when a woman finds the courage to escape a bad situation. Far as I'm concerned, I made a house call 5 miles in the other direction this morning. Understood? Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes. Why does everyone keep helping us? What do you want from me? Not a damn thing, the doctor said bluntly, except maybe for you to let yourself heal, both body and spirit. He packed up his bag and headed for the door, then paused. Samuel Graves is a good man, Mrs. Pierce. Lost his whole world 3 years back and didn't let it make him bitter. You could do worse than trusting him, though I suspect trust isn't something that comes easy to you anymore. After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet house, Grace sleeping in her arms. Through the window she could see Samuel with her daughters, showing them how to approach the mare and her foal. Margaret was laughing, actually laughing, as the foal nuzzled her palm. Sarah stood more cautiously, but even from this distance, Evelyn could see the wonder on her face. When was the last time her girls had laughed? Really laughed, without fear behind it. That night, after a supper of venison stew and fresh bread that Samuel had somehow conjured, the girls begged to stay up a little longer. Samuel had pulled out his guitar again, and the sound of it seemed to hold them all in its spell. Do you know any happy songs? Margaret asked, perched on the floor near his chair. Samuel's fingers stilled on the strings. I might remember a few. What kind of happy songs? The kind Grandma used to sing, Sarah said softly, before she died. About sunshine and flowers and good things. Something passed across Samuel's face, grief, maybe, or memory. Then he began to play a lilting melody, his voice rising in a song about a mockingbird and a diamond ring. The girls watched him with rapt attention, and gradually Margaret began to hum along. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway, baby Grace cradled against her shoulder, and felt something crack inside her. This stranger, this man who owed them nothing, was giving her daughters what she'd been unable to provide. Hope, joy, the simple pleasure of music without menace behind it. When the song ended, Margaret clapped her hands. Another one! Please! It's late, Evelyn said, her voice rough. We should let Mr. Graves rest. One more won't hurt, Samuel said, his eyes finding hers across the room. If it's all right with you. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He played another song and another, until Margaret's eyes grew heavy and Sarah leaned against the chair, fighting sleep. Finally, Evelyn herded them to bed, tucking them in with the quilts that had belonged to Samuel's wife. Mama, Margaret whispered as Evelyn bent to kiss her forehead. Can we stay here forever? I don't know, baby. We'll see. I like it here, Sarah added quietly. I like that nobody yells, nobody hits, nobody says we're mistakes. Evelyn's vision blurred. You are never mistakes, never. You hear me? Then why did Papa? Sarah's voice broke. Because your Papa is broken inside, Evelyn said, choosing her words carefully. And broken people sometimes hurt others to feel less broken themselves. But that's his failing, not yours. Never yours. She stayed with them until they drifted off, then returned to the main room to find Samuel banking the fire for the night. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable in the dim light. They're good girls, he said. smart, kind. You've raised them well despite their father, Evelyn finished. Despite growing up in hell? I wasn't going to put it quite that way, but yes. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Samuel gathered his hat and jacket, preparing to retreat to the barn as he'd done the night before. But Evelyn's voice stopped him at the door. "Why do you sleep in the barn?" she asked. "This is your home. We're the intruders." Samuel turned, his hand on the doorframe. "You're not intruders. You're guests. And guests deserve privacy and safety. The barn's fine for me. But it's cold at night and uncomfortable. And Mrs. Pierce," Samuel interrupted gently, "I sleep in the barn because I want you to feel safe. Because I know what it's like to be afraid in your own home. To wonder if the person you're supposed to trust is going to hurt you. My Anna, near the end when the fever had her in its grip, she was delirious. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like she was afraid of me. And that look broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal." He cleared his throat roughly. "So I sleep in the barn because I need you to know that you're safe here, that I'm not going to come through that door in the middle of the night, that you can rest without one eye open, listening for footsteps. You understand?" Evelyn did understand, and the understanding made her want to weep. "You're a strange man, Samuel Graves." "So I've been told." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Get some rest, Mrs. Pierce. Tomorrow's another day." He slipped out into the night, and Evelyn heard him cross the yard to the barn, his footsteps fading into the darkness. She stood alone in his house, this stranger's house, and tried to make sense of a world where kindness existed without conditions. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But maybe, she thought as she settled into the big bed with Grace beside her and her older daughters curled close, maybe sense was overrated. Maybe sometimes you just had to accept grace when it was offered, even if you couldn't understand why. The days began to blur together in a way that felt both disorienting and oddly comforting. Samuel left before dawn each morning, working his fence lines or training his horses, always leaving breakfast prepared and the fire banked. He returned at midday for a simple lunch, then disappeared again until evening. At night, he played his guitar and told stories that made Margaret laugh and Sarah forget to be afraid. And Evelyn watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and gnawing suspicion, waiting for the moment when the mask would slip, when Samuel would reveal what he really wanted in exchange for his charity. But that moment never came. On the third day, Sarah asked if she could read the books on the shelf, and Samuel not only agreed but spent an hour helping her sound out difficult words. On the fourth day, Margaret found the courage to ask about the drawing supplies, and Samuel set her up at the table with paper and charcoal, teaching her how to sketch the basic shapes of horses and trees. "You're good at this," he told Margaret as she carefully shaded the curve of a horse's neck. "You've got an artist's eye." Margaret beamed, the smile transforming her thin face. "Really? Really? My Anna used to draw. She'd sit on the porch for hours, sketching whatever caught her fancy. Birds, mostly. She loved birds." His voice grew distant. "After she died, I couldn't bear to look at her drawings. Packed them all away in a trunk. But watching you, I think she'd like knowing that someone's using her supplies, that her art is living on, in a way." Evelyn, listening from across the room while she nursed Grace, felt something shift in her perception of this man. He wasn't just being kind. He was healing himself through helping them. They were each other's salvation, in a strange way. On the fifth evening, as Samuel settled into his chair with his guitar, Margaret made a request that changed everything. "Can you teach us?" she asked. "To play music?" Samuel's fingers stilled on the strings. "You want to learn guitar?" "We want to learn anything," Sarah said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity that belied her 7 years. "Mama taught us some letters, but Papa said girls didn't need education. Said it was a waste. But I want to read all the books. I want to know things. I want to—" Her voice broke. "I want to be more than what he said we were." Evelyn's breath caught. She'd tried so hard to protect her daughters from Caleb's poison, but clearly some of it had seeped in anyway, leaving them convinced they needed to prove their worth. Samuel set down his guitar and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Sarah, Margaret, look at me." They did, their eyes wide and uncertain. "You already are more." You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You're smart and brave and full of potential. Any man who can't see that is a fool, and his opinion doesn't matter. But Papa said, Margaret began. Your papa was wrong, Samuel said firmly. And I'll tell you something else. The smartest person I ever knew was a woman. My Anna could calculate numbers in her head faster than any banker, could read Latin and Greek, knew more about horse breeding than most men who'd been doing it their whole lives. And you know what the town said about her? That she was unnatural, that she should have been content to cook and clean and keep her mouth shut. He shook his head, anger flashing across his features. But she wasn't content with that, and I loved her more for it. So yes, I'll teach you. I'll teach you anything you want to learn. Reading, writing, arithmetic, music, whatever your minds are hungry for. Because educating girls isn't a waste. It's an investment in a better future. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? Every word. And so the lessons began. Each evening after supper, Samuel would pull out Anna's old primers and teach Sarah and Margaret their letters, their numbers, their grammar. He was patient but demanding, expecting their best effort and accepting nothing less. When Sarah struggled with a particularly difficult word, he'd break it down into smaller pieces. When Margaret's attention wandered, he'd find a way to make the lesson more engaging. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, pretending to focus on mending or caring for Grace, but secretly drinking in every word. She'd had so little education herself, just enough to read simple texts and write her name. Listening to Samuel teach her daughters filled her with a bittersweet mixture of joy and regret. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, Samuel found her at the kitchen table, laboriously copying letters onto a scrap of paper by candlelight. What are you working on? He asked. Evelyn's hand jerked, smudging the ink. Nothing, just nothing. He moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the careful, childish lettering. You're practicing your letters. Shame burned through her. I know it's foolish, a grown woman writing like a child. But Caleb said I didn't need to know more than I already did. Said women who tried to be clever were asking for trouble. May I? Samuel gestured to the empty chair beside her. She nodded, and he sat, pulling the paper toward him. Your letters are good. You've got a steady hand, but here... He picked up the pen and demonstrated. If you angle the nib like this, you'll get cleaner lines. And this letter, that's a G, but you're making it like a Q. See the difference? For the next hour, he taught her the way he taught her daughters, with patience and respect and no hint of condescension. When Evelyn finally mastered the troublesome G, she looked up to find Samuel smiling at her. What? She asked, self-conscious. Nothing. Just, you light up when you learn something new. It's nice to see. Evelyn looked away, uncomfortable with the warmth in his gaze. I should get to bed. Grace will be up soon for her feeding. Mrs. Pierce. Evelyn, Samuel said, stopping her as she rose. She froze at the sound of her first name in his voice. He'd always been so formal before. You don't have to hide your hunger to learn. Not here. This house, it's a place for growing, for becoming more than what the world told you you could be. For all of you. She met his eyes, searching for the lie, for the ulterior motive, but all she saw was sincerity and something else, a deep, abiding loneliness that mirrored her own. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't want repayment, Samuel said. Just want to see you and your girls thrive. That's payment enough. He stood and headed for the door, grabbing his jacket from the peg. But Evelyn's voice stopped him one more time. Samuel, you don't have to sleep in the barn anymore. I trust you. We all do. Samuel turned, and in the candlelight, she saw the sheen of moisture in his eyes. Thank you for that, he said roughly. But I'll keep to the barn a while longer. Not because I think you don't trust me, but because trust is fragile and I don't want to risk breaking it. Give it time, Evelyn. Give yourself time. He left, and through the window, Evelyn watched him cross to the barn, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. A moment later, she heard the soft strains of music drifting through the night, that same song about the star that never went out, no matter how dark the storm. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, And for the first time since leaving Buckskin, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. But peace, Evelyn was learning, was always temporary, and the past had a way of catching up no matter how far or how fast you ran. The storm came on the 11th day, though not from the sky. Evelyn was at the creek with Margaret, washing clothes in the cool water while Grace slept in a basket beneath the cottonwood tree. Sarah sat nearby with a book, sounding out words with increasing confidence. The afternoon sun filtered through the golden leaves, dappling everything in warm light, and for a moment, just a moment, Evelyn let herself forget about Buckskin, about Caleb, about the life she'd fled. Then Margaret pointed toward the ridge, her wet hand dripping onto Evelyn's arm. "Mama, look, Ryder's coming." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She stood slowly, shading her eyes against the sun, and counted 4 horses descending the trail toward the ranch. Even from this distance, she recognized the lead rider by the way he sat his horse, slouched and aggressive, like violence barely contained. "Caleb." "Girls, get to the house," Evelyn said, her voice tight and controlled. "Now, don't run, walk normal, but get inside and bar the door." "Mama?" Sarah's face had gone white. "Do as I say." Evelyn scooped up Grace's basket with trembling hands. "Go. Hide in the bedroom. Don't come out no matter what you hear." She watched her daughters hurry toward the house, then forced herself to walk, not run, walk, back along the creek path. Her mind raced. Samuel was out in the north pasture, too far to hear if she called. The rifle he kept above the mantel might as well have been in another state. She had nothing, no weapon, no protection, nothing but her own body between Caleb and her children. By the time she reached the yard, the riders had arrived. Caleb swung down from his horse with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more time in saloons than working, his 3 companions spreading out in a loose semicircle. She recognized 2 of them, Frank Jessup and Tom Barlow, men who'd witnessed Caleb's rages before and done nothing to stop them. The third was a stranger, older and harder looking, with a deputy's star pinned to his vest. "Well, well," Caleb said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "There's my runaway wife. Thought you could just disappear, did you? Thought I wouldn't find you?" Evelyn stopped 10 feet away, clutching Grace's basket to her chest. "How did you find us?" "Martha Clemens has a loose tongue when her husband needs money," Caleb said, moving closer. "Told me all about the stranger who came asking after you. Samuel Graves owns a horse ranch beyond the ridge. Weren't hard to figure out." He gestured to his companions. "Brought witnesses this time. Legal witnesses. You abandoned your husband, Evelyn. Left your home without permission. That makes you a thief. You stole yourself and my daughters and whatever else you could carry." "I stole nothing," Evelyn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I left because you beat me near to death for birthing a daughter. I left to save our children from watching you kill me." Frank Jessup shifted uncomfortably at that, but Tom Barlow just spat tobacco juice into the dirt. The deputy, his badge read Porter, watched with cold, calculating eyes. "That's her version," Caleb said to Porter. "My version is she ran off with another man. Adultery, abandonment. I want my property back." "We're not property," Evelyn said, louder now. "We're human beings, and I'd rather die than go back to you." Caleb's face darkened. "You might get your wish, you ungrateful. That's far enough." Samuel's voice cut across the yard like a blade. He'd come from the barn, and Evelyn hadn't even heard him approach. He stood 20 feet away, his stance deceptively casual, a hammer hanging loose in his right hand. Not a gun, just a hammer. But something in his bearing made even Caleb pause. "This doesn't concern you, Graves," Caleb said. "This is between a man and his wife." "She's on my land," Samuel replied quietly. "That makes it my concern." "You hiding behind another man now, Evelyn?" Caleb sneered. "Found yourself a new husband already? Or maybe you're just spreading your legs for room and board?" Samuel's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white around the hammer's handle. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You gonna hit me with that hammer?" Caleb laughed, and his friends joined in. "I got a deputy here, Graves. I got the law on my side. You interfere with a man claiming his legal property. That's a crime." Deputy Porter finally spoke, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "Mr. Graves, the law's clear. Mrs. Pierce is married to Mr. Pierce. She has no legal right to leave without his permission. I'm going to have to ask you to stand aside. Samuel didn't move. And if I don't? Porter's hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Then I'll have to arrest you for obstruction. Wait! Evelyn stepped forward, putting herself between Samuel and the deputy. Please, don't. This isn't your fight, Samuel. You've done enough, more than enough. She turned to face Caleb, and the look in his eyes, triumph mixed with malice, made her stomach turn. But she lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. If I come back, she said slowly, you leave Samuel Graves alone. You don't press charges. You don't cause trouble. You get what you want, your wife and daughters back. That's the deal. Evelyn, no. Samuel started forward, but Porter drew his gun, pointing it at Samuel's chest. Stay where you are, the deputy ordered. Caleb's smile was a slash of cruelty across his face. Well, now that's more like it. Finally remembering your place, are you? Took you long enough. He held out his hand. Come on then. Let's go home. Evelyn took one step forward, then another. Grace began to cry in her basket, as if sensing her mother's terror. Each step felt like walking to her own execution. But what choice did she have? If she refused, they'd arrest Samuel, maybe hurt him. And her daughters, God, her daughters would watch it all happen. She was 3 steps away when a voice rang out across the yard, young and fierce and absolutely certain. No! Sarah stood on the porch, her small body rigid with defiance. Margaret appeared behind her, tears streaming down her face, but her jaw set with determination. We're not going back, Sarah continued, her voice shaking but strong. We're not going back to that place, to him. Caleb's expression shifted from triumph to rage. Get in the house, girl, before you what? Sarah demanded. Before you beat us like you beat Mama? Before you tell us we're mistakes and worthless and should have been sons? She took a step forward, and Evelyn's heart seized with fear and pride in equal measure. We heard what Mr. Samuel said, that we're not mistakes, that girls are just as valuable as boys, and we believe him, not you. You little... Caleb started toward the porch, but Samuel moved faster, putting himself in Caleb's path. The hammer was raised now, not threatening, but ready. Touch those children, and I'll break every bone in your hand, Samuel said, his voice so cold it could have frozen the desert. You want to fight someone? Fight me. Samuel, please, Evelyn begged, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on Caleb, and there was something in them that made even Frank Jessup take a step back. You know what your problem is, Pierce? Samuel said conversationally. You're so busy trying to prove you're a man that you forgot how to be human. You beat a woman half your size to feel powerful. You terrorize children to feel in control. And you call it being a husband, being a father, when really it's just being a coward. Caleb's face went purple. You son of a... He swung wildly, but Samuel sidestepped easily, and the momentum of Caleb's own punch sent him stumbling. Tom Barlow moved to help his friend, but Samuel spun toward him, the hammer raised. I wouldn't, Samuel said. Not unless you want to explain to your wife why you came home with a broken arm. This is assault, Porter shouted, finally seeming to remember he was supposed to be enforcing the law. Everyone stand down or I'll pull. You'll what? The new voice came from the road, and everyone turned to see Doc Matheson climbing down from his buggy, followed by 3 women Evelyn recognized from town, the school teacher, the preacher's wife, and Martha Clemens herself, looking equal parts guilty and defiant. What's going on here? Doc Matheson demanded, striding into the yard with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Porter, why are you pointing a gun at Samuel Graves? This man is interfering with, Porter began. With what? A man trying to drag his battered wife back to a place where he beats her bloody? The doctor turned to Evelyn, his eyes softening. Mrs. Pierce, would you show these gentlemen your face? Let them see what kind of husband Mr. Pierce has been? Evelyn's hands shook, but she lifted her chin, letting the afternoon sun illuminate the bruises that had faded from purple to sickly yellow-green. She saw Frank Jessup look away. Even Tom Barlow had the decency to seem uncomfortable. That's old history, Caleb protested. Just a husband keeping his wife in line. It's legal. Actually, the schoolteacher interrupted, stepping forward with a leather-bound book in her hands. According to Arizona territorial law, excessive battery of a spouse is grounds for legal separation. And I'd say beating a woman unconscious for birthing a daughter qualifies as excessive. Who asked you? Caleb snarled. This is none of your business, you dried up old. Mind your tongue, the preacher's wife said sharply, her voice carrying surprising steel. Mrs. Henderson here is doing more to educate this territory's children than you've done in your entire sorry life. Show some respect. Respect? Caleb laughed bitterly. From women who stick their noses where they don't belong? This is between me and my wife. Then let her speak, Martha Clemens said quietly. All eyes turned to the midwife. She looked older than Evelyn remembered, her face lined with regret. I'm sorry, she said, meeting Evelyn's gaze. I'm so sorry I told him. My husband, he needed the money, and Caleb offered good coin for information, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to make it right. She turned to Deputy Porter. I was there the night Mrs. Pierce gave birth. I saw what condition she was in, fresh bruises on her arms and back from earlier beatings, and I heard Caleb Pierce storm in drunk and furious, heard him beating her while she held a newborn baby, heard her daughter screaming for him to stop. Her voice hardened. You want to talk about law? Let's talk about how the law protects men like Caleb and condemns women like Evelyn for having the courage to survive. Porter's gun hand had lowered slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. That's all well and good, but marriage is a legal contract. A contract signed under duress isn't binding, Mrs. Henderson said, flipping through her book. And I'd argue that any woman who stays in a marriage primarily out of fear for her life is under duress. This is ridiculous, Tom Barlow muttered. Since when do women get to decide when a marriage is over? Since now, Samuel said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made everyone pay attention. Here, in this place, on my land, no child is called a mistake. No woman is considered property. And no man gets to use his fist to enforce his will. He looked at each person in turn, Caleb, Porter, Frank, Tom, his gaze steady and unflinching. You want Evelyn back, you want her daughters, then you go through me first, and I promise you I won't go down easy. Samuel, Evelyn whispered, terrified for him. Please don't. Hush now, he said gently, not taking his eyes off Caleb. I made you a promise, remember? That I'd raise your daughters proud. Can't do that if I let their father drag them back to hell. The moment stretched taut, balanced on a knife's edge. Caleb's hand drifted toward his belt, where Evelyn knew he kept a knife. Frank and Tom exchanged glances, clearly calculating whether this fight was worth the risk. Deputy Porter looked between Samuel and the growing crowd of townspeople, seeming to realize that this situation had spiraled far beyond a simple domestic dispute. Then Sarah's voice rang out again, clear and strong despite her tears. Mr. Deputy, can I say something? Porter looked relieved to have an excuse to holster his weapon. Go ahead, child. Sarah descended the porch steps, Margaret following close behind. They walked right up to the deputy, these two small girls with tangled hair and patched dresses, and looked him square in the eye. My papa used to lock us in the root cellar, Sarah said, her voice matter-of-fact in a way that made it all the more horrifying. When he was drinking, sometimes for hours. Margaret's afraid of the dark now because of it. She wakes up screaming. And Mama used to hide bread in her pockets, Margaret added, because Papa would eat all the food and leave nothing for us. We went to bed hungry most nights, all because we were girls instead of boys. Sarah took a shaky breath. Mr. Samuel taught me to read. Real reading, not just letters. He says I'm smart. He says I could be a teacher someday if I wanted. Nobody ever said I could be anything before. Her young face crumpled. Please don't make us go back, please. We'll die there. Maybe not right away, but slowly. Our spirits will die even if our bodies don't. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Caleb seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Margaret began to cry in earnest, and Mrs. Henderson moved forward to wrap her arms around both girls. There now, the schoolteacher murmured. There now, brave ones. You've said your piece. Deputy Porter removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with a decision that shouldn't have been difficult, but somehow was in a world where men's rights superseded women's lives. Mr. Pierce, he finally said, I think you should leave. Caleb's head snapped up. What? She's my wife. Those are my daughters. You can't. I can, and I am, Porter said, his voice firmer now. This isn't a simple case of a wife leaving her husband. This is a case of a woman fleeing violence with her children. And those children, he looked at Sarah and Margaret, those children just testified against you, in front of witnesses. They're just girls, Caleb exploded. Their word means plenty, Porter interrupted, especially when backed by a midwife, a doctor, and half the respectable women in buckskin. He settled his hat back on his head. You want to fight this? Take it to a judge, but I'm not dragging a battered woman and 3 children back to your house today. That's final. Frank Jessup cleared his throat. Caleb, maybe we should just— Shut up, Frank, Caleb snarled. But the fight had gone out of him, replaced by something uglier, humiliation mixed with rage. He turned that poisonous gaze on Evelyn. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over. Yes, it is, Samuel said quietly. He'd lowered the hammer but still held it loosely, ready if needed. You set foot on my property again, Pierce, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing. You send someone else to harass Mrs. Pierce or her daughters, I'll have them arrested too. And if you even think about hurting them again, I'll make sure every person in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. Caleb took a step forward, and for a moment Evelyn thought he might actually be foolish enough to attack Samuel in front of a deputy and a dozen witnesses. But Tom Barlow grabbed his arm. Come on, Tom muttered. It's done. Let's go. Slowly, reluctantly, Caleb let himself be led back to his horse. He mounted awkwardly, his movements jerky with suppressed fury. Before turning to leave, he looked at Evelyn one last time. You are mine, he said, and there was genuine bewilderment in his voice, as if he truly couldn't understand how his property had gained the ability to choose. I owned you. No, Evelyn said, and her voice carried across the yard with a strength she didn't know she possessed. You never owned me. You just convinced me I was too broken to leave. But I'm not broken. I'm surviving, and that's something you'll never understand. Caleb's face twisted with an emotion Evelyn couldn't quite name. Rage mixed with something that might have been loss. Then he wheeled his horse around and spurred it hard, sending it galloping back toward the ridge. Frank and Tom followed, casting uncertain glances over their shoulders. Deputy Porter lingered a moment longer. Mrs. Pierce, I need to know, are you staying here of your own free will? I am, Evelyn said without hesitation. And Mr. Graves hasn't coerced you in any way? Hasn't taken advantage of your situation? Samuel saved my life, Evelyn said firmly. He's given me and my daughters safety, food, and kindness. He's asked for nothing in return. And if you're suggesting something improper, Deputy, then you're as bad as Caleb. Porter had the grace to look ashamed. I had to ask, ma'am. It's my job. He mounted his horse. For what it's worth, I hope you find peace here. God knows you've earned it. He rode off, leaving Evelyn standing in the yard with her daughters, Samuel, and the small group of townspeople who'd come to her defense. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and Evelyn's legs suddenly felt like water. She swayed, and Samuel was there instantly, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. Easy now, he murmured. It's over. You're safe. Am I? Evelyn whispered. Caleb said it wasn't over. What if he comes back? What if he brings more men? Or, then we'll deal with it, Doc Matheson said, moving to her other side. Together. You're not alone anymore, Mrs. Pierce. You've got friends now. Mrs. Henderson approached with Sarah and Margaret, both girls still crying, but with something like hope beginning to bloom in their eyes. The preacher's wife produced a handkerchief and dabbed at Margaret's face. You're very brave, she told the girls. Both of you. What you did today, standing up to your father like that took more courage than most adults ever show in their whole lives. I was so scared, Margaret admitted. I thought he was going to take us. But he didn't, Sarah said, wrapping her arms around her sister. We're still here. We're safe. Martha Clemens hung back, clearly unsure of her welcome. When Evelyn's eyes found her, the midwife flinched. I don't expect you to forgive me, Martha said. What I did, telling Caleb where you were, it was unforgivable. But when I saw him riding out here with those men, looking like he meant real harm, She shook her head. I couldn't let it stand, so I told the doctor, and we gathered who we could. Evelyn studied the older woman's face, seeing genuine remorse there. Why did you tell him in the first place? Money, Martha said bluntly. My husband drinks, same as Caleb, and when he drinks, he gambles. We were 3 months behind on rent, facing eviction. Caleb offered $50 for information about where you'd gone. $50, Mrs. Pierce. I know that doesn't excuse it, but her voice broke. I've been poor so long I've forgotten what it's like to have principles. That's no excuse, Mrs. Henderson said sharply. Poverty doesn't justify betrayal. No, Evelyn said slowly, but it explains it. And Martha came back. She brought help when it mattered most. She met the midwife's eyes. I don't forgive you, not yet, but maybe someday. Martha nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. That's more than I deserve, thank you. The group began to disperse as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Mrs. Henderson promised to bring by some books for the girls. The preacher's wife mentioned organizing a women's reading circle that met every Wednesday. Doc Matheson checked Evelyn over one more time before leaving, making her promise to rest and not let the excitement take too much of a toll. Finally, only Samuel and Evelyn and the girls remained, standing in the gathering dusk. Grace had fallen asleep in her basket, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded around her. Thank you, Evelyn said to Samuel, the words feeling painfully inadequate. For everything. For standing up to him. For risking your own safety. Didn't risk much, Samuel said. Caleb's a bully, and bullies fold when someone stands up to them. Besides, he looked at Sarah and Margaret. These girls needed to see that someone was willing to fight for them, that they're worth fighting for. Sarah launched herself at Samuel, wrapping her thin arms around his waist. Thank you, Mr. Samuel. Thank you for making Papa leave. Margaret joined her sister, and Samuel stood there with 2 children clinging to him, looking both profoundly moved and utterly overwhelmed. He patted their backs awkwardly, his eyes meeting Evelyn's over their heads. Come on now, he said gently. Let's get inside. I imagine everyone's hungry, and standing around in the dark won't help anything. They filed into the house, Sarah and Margaret reluctant to release their hold on Samuel. Inside, he built up the fire while Evelyn started supper with trembling hands. The normalcy of it, chopping vegetables, stirring the pot, setting the table, felt surreal after the violence of the afternoon. Over a meal of beans and cornbread, the girls chattered nervously, their words tumbling over each other as they processed what had happened. Samuel listened patiently, answering their questions as honestly as he could. Will Papa really stay away? Margaret asked, her voice small. I think so, Samuel said. He was embarrassed today. Had witnesses see him get run off. Men like your father, their pride matters more to them than almost anything. He won't want to risk another public humiliation. But what if he doesn't care about embarrassment? Sarah pressed. What if he comes back with more men? What if... Then I'll be ready, Samuel said firmly. I've got a rifle, and I know how to use it. And more importantly, you've got a whole town of people who know the truth now, who saw your father's cruelty and your mother's courage. That's armor, in a way. The truth is armor. After supper, exhaustion crashed over all of them like a wave. The girls barely made it through their evening lesson before their eyes started drooping. Evelyn tucked them into bed, listening to their whispered worries and reassuring them as best she could. Mama, Sarah murmured as Evelyn bent to kiss her forehead. Are we going to stay here forever, with Mr. Samuel? I don't know, sweetheart. We'll figure it out as we go. I hope we stay, Margaret added sleepily. I like it here. It feels safe. Safe. What a luxury that word was, Evelyn thought as she returned to the main room. What a precious, fragile thing. Samuel was cleaning up from supper, his movements methodical and practiced. Evelyn moved to help him, and they worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Samuel spoke. You did something remarkable today, he said quietly. Standing up to him like that, letting your daughters speak their truth, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen. I was terrified, Evelyn admitted. I'm still terrified. What if this isn't over? What if... It might not be, Samuel interrupted gently. I won't lie to you. Caleb might try again, might cause more trouble. But Evelyn, you can't live your life in fear of what might happen. You can only live each day as it comes and trust that you're strong enough to face whatever comes next. I don't feel strong. That's because you don't understand what strength looks like, Samuel said. He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the firelight. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've been strong every day of your marriage, surviving what would have killed weaker women. And you're strong now, building a new life for yourself and your girls. Don't ever doubt that. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. How do you do that? Do what? Say exactly what I need to hear. Make me believe things might actually be okay. Samuel smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful thing Evelyn had ever seen. Because I needed someone to tell me that 3 years ago, and nobody did. So I'm telling you now, hoping it makes a difference. They stood there in the warm kitchen, two broken people learning how to be whole again, and something shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. Not romance exactly, but recognition. The understanding that they were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued, but two people walking the same difficult path. Samuel? Evelyn said softly. You don't have to sleep in the barn tonight. You really don't. It's getting cold, and you've more than proven you're trustworthy. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn, I appreciate that, but I think, for now, I'll stick to my routine. Not because I don't trust myself, and not because I think you don't trust me, but because trust is like a garden. It needs time and tending to grow properly, and I don't want to rush it. He collected his jacket and guitar, pausing at the door. Besides, I play better in the barn, better acoustics. He winked, and Evelyn found herself smiling despite everything. After he'd gone, she stood at the window and watched the light appear in the barn loft. A moment later, the sound of his guitar drifted across the yard, and his voice rose in that familiar song about the star that never died. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the music fill the empty spaces inside her, the places Caleb's cruelty had hollowed out. And for the first time since fleeing Buckskin, she allowed herself to feel something beyond mere survival. She felt hope. Real, dangerous, beautiful hope. The kind of hope that maybe, just maybe, her daughters would grow up knowing they were valued, that they would never have to endure what she had endured, that they would become women who understood their worth, not because a man told them, but because they'd learned it from watching their mother refuse to settle for anything less. Outside, Samuel sang about storms and stars and the courage it took to keep shining even when darkness threatened to swallow everything whole. And inside, Evelyn Pierce stood in the house of a stranger who'd become something more and dared to believe that brighter days were coming, that the worst was behind them, that they were finally truly safe. She was wrong, of course. The worst was yet to come. But in that moment, with her daughters sleeping peacefully and Samuel's music wrapping around her like a protective embrace, Evelyn let herself believe the lie. Sometimes, believing was all you could do. Sometimes, hope was the only weapon you had left. 2 weeks passed before Caleb made his next move, and when it came, it wasn't with fists or fury, but with something far more insidious, the law itself. Samuel had ridden into Buckskin for supplies, leaving Evelyn and the girls at the ranch with instructions to keep the doors locked and the rifle loaded. The morning had been peaceful, almost deceptively so. Sarah sat at the kitchen table practicing her multiplication tables while Margaret sketched horses in the margins of Samuel's old ledger. Grace cooed from her basket, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through the window. Evelyn was kneading bread dough, her hands working the mixture with a rhythm she'd finally started to master when she heard the sound of wagon wheels on the road. Her stomach clenched reflexively, but when she looked out the window, she recognized Doc Matheson's buggy. Relief flooded through her, until she saw his expression as he climbed down. "Mrs. Pierce," he called, his voice tight with urgency. "I need to speak with you, now." Evelyn wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, dread pooling in her belly. "What's wrong?" The doctor pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, his weathered face grim. "Caleb's filed a petition with the territorial court. He's claiming Samuel kidnapped you and the children. Says he wants his family returned and Samuel prosecuted for abduction and alienation of affection. The world tilted sideways. Evelyn gripped the porch railing to steady herself. But that's a lie. Samuel didn't kidnap anyone. I chose to leave. I chose to come here. I know that, and you know that. But Caleb's got himself a lawyer, a slick one from Phoenix who specializes in these kinds of cases. Fellow named Thornton Ashford. And they're not just going after Samuel, they're going after you too. Doc Matheson's voice dropped. Evelyn, they're claiming you're an unfit mother, that you abandoned your home and exposed your children to immoral circumstances by living unchaperoned with a man who isn't your husband. The words hit like physical blows. Immoral circumstances? We've done nothing wrong. Samuel sleeps in the barn, for heaven's sake. We barely... She stopped, aware of her daughters listening from inside. This is insane. It's calculated, the doctor corrected. Ashford's good at what he does. He knows that even if he can't prove kidnapping, he can destroy your reputation so thoroughly that no judge will grant you custody. And without your children as leverage, you'll have to go back to Caleb or face destitution. Evelyn felt the familiar cage closing around her again, the walls pressing in from all sides. When is the hearing? 3 days. Saturday morning. In Buckskin. Doc Matheson hesitated. There's more. Ashford's been interviewing witnesses, people who've known you and Caleb for years, and not all of them are sympathetic to your situation. Who? The question came out as a whisper. Tom Barlow's wife claims you were always flirtatious with men at church socials. Frank Jessup says he saw you and Samuel talking alone before you left Caleb, suggesting the affair was planned. And Caleb himself is painting a picture of a devoted husband, driven to drink by a faithless, disobedient wife who couldn't even give him sons. Rage flared hot in Evelyn's chest, burning through the fear. That's all lies, every word of it. Truth doesn't always win in court, Doc Matheson said bluntly, especially when you're a woman going up against a man, and especially when that man has money and a smooth-talking lawyer. He gripped her shoulders gently. But you've got something Caleb doesn't. You've got people who've actually seen what he is. Martha Clemens will testify. So will I. Mrs. Henderson and the preacher's wife both said they'd speak on your behalf. Will it be enough? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. The doctor's silence was answer enough. They were still standing on the porch when Samuel returned, his wagon loaded with lumber and supplies. He took one look at their faces and set the brake, jumping down with athletic grace. What happened? He demanded, moving toward them. Is it Caleb? He's taking us to court, Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady. Claiming you kidnapped us. Claiming I'm an unfit mother living in sin. Samuel's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jump. When? Saturday. 3 days from now. Doc Matheson handed him the petition. You'll need a lawyer, Samuel, a good one. I can't afford a good lawyer, Samuel said, scanning the document. His face grew darker with each line he read. Hell, I can't afford a bad lawyer. I've got some money saved, but not enough for this. Then we'll figure something else out, the doctor said. Maybe I can... No. Evelyn's voice cut through their planning like a knife. Both men turned to look at her. No lawyers, no courtroom battles, I'll go back to him. Like hell you will, Samuel said immediately. It's the only way to protect you, Evelyn continued, her mind racing ahead, seeing the path forward with terrible clarity. If I go back, Caleb drops the charges. You keep your land, your freedom. And the girls... Her voice cracked. The girls at least know their mother chose to sacrifice for them rather than abandon them. Absolutely not, Samuel said, his voice hard as iron. I won't let you do that. It's not your choice to make, Evelyn shot back. This is my life, my decision. And what about your daughters? Samuel demanded, gesturing toward the house where Sarah and Margaret had appeared in the doorway, their faces white with fear. What about showing them that women have value, that they don't have to accept cruelty as the price of survival? You go back to Caleb. You teach them that nothing's changed, that men still own women, no matter what pretty words we say about equality and justice. And if I don't go back, you lose everything. Evelyn's voice rose, raw with desperation. They'll take your land, throw you in jail, destroy your life, all because you were foolish enough to help a stranger. How is that fair? How is that right? It's not, Samuel agreed. But since when has fairness had anything to do with what's right? He moved closer, his eyes burning with intensity. Evelyn, listen to me. If you go back, Caleb wins. Not just this battle, but the whole war. He wins the right to beat you without consequence. He wins the right to terrorize your daughters. He wins the right to crush every bit of spirit and hope out of all of you until there's nothing left but shells going through the motions of living. But you'd be safe, Evelyn whispered. You'd be free. I'd be a coward, Samuel corrected, and I'd have to live with knowing I let fear win, that I stood by while a good woman and 3 innocent children walked back into hell because I wasn't brave enough to fight. He reached out, taking her hands in his. I'm not that man. I won't be that man. We fight this together, or we don't fight at all. Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. Stubborn, foolish, beautiful truth. He meant every word. He would stand beside her even if it cost him everything. You're insane, she said, but there was no heat in it. Probably, Samuel agreed, but I'm right too. And you know it. Doc Matheson cleared his throat. Touching as this is, we need a plan, a real one, something better than noble sacrifice or hopeless defiance. What do you suggest? Samuel asked, not taking his eyes off Evelyn. The doctor was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face lit up with something that might have been inspiration or might have been madness. We changed the battlefield. Right now, Caleb's framing this as a kidnapping and an affair, crimes with clear victims and villains. But what if we reframe it as something else entirely? What if we make this about the children? I don't follow, Samuel said. The law's murky when it comes to marriage and property rights, Doc Matheson explained, his words coming faster now. But it's somewhat clearer when it comes to child welfare. If we can prove, really prove, that Caleb poses a danger to his daughters, that staying with him would constitute abuse, then we might have grounds for the court to grant Evelyn custody independent of the marriage. Can that even be done? Evelyn asked, hope flickering to life in her chest. It's rare, the doctor admitted. Very rare. But there's precedent. A case in California 5 years ago where a judge granted a mother sole custody after the father was proven to be habitually violent, and another in Texas where he stopped seeing their expressions. The point is, it's possible. Difficult, but possible. We'd need evidence, Samuel said slowly. Not just testimony, but actual proof of abuse. We have proof, Evelyn said quietly. Both men looked at her. My body. The scars don't lie. And the girls, they can testify to what they've seen, what they've endured. They're children, Doc Matheson said gently. The court might not. Then we make them listen, Evelyn interrupted, steel entering her voice. We make them see what Caleb is, what he's done, and we make them choose. Do they send 3 little girls back to a man who locks them in cellars and starves them for being born female? Or do they finally admit that maybe, just maybe, women and children deserve better than legal bondage to violent men? Samuel smiled, fierce and proud. There's the fighter I knew was in there. Fighting's easy when you've got nothing left to lose, Evelyn said. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. But I do have something to lose now, and that makes this terrifying. Welcome to caring about people, Samuel said. It's awful, isn't it? Despite everything, Evelyn laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that was more pain than humor. Absolutely terrible. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henderson arrived with a proper dress for Evelyn to wear to court. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. The preacher's wife coached her on how to speak before a judge, how to present herself as a victim without appearing weak. You need to be sympathetic but strong, she instructed. Show them you're a mother protecting her children, not a hysterical woman running from responsibility. What if I am hysterical? Evelyn asked. What if I get up there and just fall apart? Then you fall apart with dignity, the preacher's wife said firmly. You fall apart like a human being who's endured hell and is still standing. There's no shame in that. Samuel spent hours with Sarah and Margaret, preparing them for what might come. He was gentle but honest, explaining that they might have to tell a room full of strangers about the worst things their father had done. I'm scared, Margaret admitted, her small voice trembling. What if Papa gets mad? What if he hurts us? He won't, Samuel promised. "I'll be right there. And even if I wasn't, you're braver than you think, both of you. You stood up to him once already. You can do it again." "But what if we say something wrong?" Sarah worried. "What if we mess up and Mama has to go back?" Samuel knelt down to their level, looking each girl in the eye. "You tell the truth, that's all. Just the truth about what you saw and what you felt. If you do that, no matter what happens, you'll know you did your best, and sometimes that's all we can do." The night before the hearing, Samuel played his guitar on the porch while the girls danced in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Evelyn watched from the doorway with Grace in her arms, memorizing this moment, the warmth, the safety, the impossible peace of it. "You look worried," Samuel said, pausing his playing. "I am worried," Evelyn admitted. "What if tomorrow doesn't go the way we hope? What if the judge sides with Caleb?" Samuel set down his guitar and stood, moving to stand beside her. They watched the girls in silence for a moment, Sarah spinning Margaret in dizzy circles. "Then we figure out the next step," Samuel finally said. "Maybe we leave Arizona, head to California or Oregon, where Caleb's reach doesn't extend. Maybe we fight in a different court or through different channels. But we don't quit, and we don't go back. That's the one thing we can control. We can choose to keep fighting." "You'd leave your home?" Evelyn asked, startled. "Everything you've built here?" "I'd leave all of it," Samuel said simply. "A house is just wood and nails. Land is just dirt and grass. What matters is people. And you and those girls—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "You've become my people, and I protect my people, no matter what it costs." Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't deserve you. We don't deserve any of this." "That's where you're wrong," Samuel said, his voice soft but certain. "You deserve safety. You deserve respect. You deserve a life where you're not constantly afraid. And if tomorrow's court won't give you that, then we'll find somewhere that will." The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold, frost painting the windows in delicate patterns. Evelyn dressed with trembling hands, Sarah helping her with the buttons on the borrowed dress. Margaret plaited her hair, her small fingers surprisingly deft. "You look pretty, Mama," Margaret said when they'd finished. "I look scared," Evelyn corrected, but she smiled at her daughter's reflection in the mirror. "You can be both," Sarah said wisely, pretty and scared and brave all at once. The ride to Buckskin seemed to take both forever and no time at all. Samuel drove the wagon with steady hands, Doc Matheson riding alongside. Mrs. Henderson and the preacher's wife followed in their own buggy, along with Martha Clemens, who'd insisted on coming despite her shame over her earlier betrayal. As they approached the town, Evelyn felt her chest tighten with each familiar landmark. There was the general store where Caleb had once slapped her for questioning a purchase. There was the church where she'd prayed every Sunday for the strength to endure another week. There was the saloon where her husband had spent more hours than in his own home. The courthouse was a modest wooden building that also served as the town hall and occasional school. A crowd had gathered outside, more people than Evelyn had expected. Some faces were sympathetic, others curious, and a few openly hostile. She saw Tom Barlow's wife whispering behind her hand to another woman, their eyes following Evelyn with undisguised judgment. Caleb stood near the entrance with his lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit who looked wildly out of place in rough-hewn buckskin. Thornton Ashford had the smooth, confident air of someone who'd never lost a case and didn't expect to start now. When his eyes landed on Evelyn, his smile was all professional courtesy with no warmth behind it. Caleb himself looked almost respectable, cleaned up, sober, wearing his Sunday clothes. He'd even trimmed his beard and combed his hair. The transformation was startling and deeply unsettling. This was the Caleb he showed the world, the mask he wore to hide the monster underneath. When his gaze met Evelyn's, she saw something flicker there, triumph mixed with possession. He thought he'd already won. Samuel helped Evelyn down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow. "Remember what we talked about," he murmured. "Tell the truth. That's your weapon. The truth." They filed into the courthouse, which had been arranged with chairs facing a raised desk where Judge Morrison would preside. Evelyn had seen the judge before, a stern man in his 60s with silver hair and a reputation for fairness tempered with traditional values. Whether those values would extend to protecting women from violent husbands remained to be seen. The room filled quickly, spectators cramming into every available space. Evelyn found herself sitting at a table with Samuel and her daughters, facing Caleb and Ashford across the aisle. The proximity made her skin crawl. She could smell Caleb's bay rum cologne, could hear his breathing, could feel the weight of his stare even when she refused to look at him. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. He settled behind his desk, arranged his papers, and surveyed the room with sharp, intelligent eyes. This is a hearing to determine the facts in the matter of Caleb Pierce versus Samuel Graves and Evelyn Pierce. He began, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. Mr. Pierce has filed charges of kidnapping and alienation of affection, and has petitioned for the return of his wife and children. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This is not a trial. This is an evidentiary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed with criminal charges or custody modifications. Everyone will have their chance to speak. Everyone will be heard. And everyone will conduct themselves with respect for this court and this process. Am I understood? A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Good. Mr. Ashford, you may present your case. The lawyer rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. The facts of this case are straightforward. On the night of October 15th, my client's wife disappeared from their home with their 3 daughters and the family's meager possessions. Shortly thereafter, she was discovered residing at the ranch of one Samuel Graves, a man known to my client but not well known to Mrs. Pierce prior to her disappearance. He paced as he spoke, his movements calculated for maximum effect. Mr. Pierce has maintained all along that his wife was taken against her will by Mr. Graves, who saw an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable woman in the aftermath of a difficult childbirth. We will show that Mr. Graves had means, motive, and opportunity to commit this abduction, and we will show that Mrs. Pierce, in her weakened and confused state, was unable to resist his manipulations. That's a lie, Margaret burst out before anyone could stop her. Samuel's hand came down gently on her shoulder, and the judge's gavel cracked once. Young lady, you will have your chance to speak, Morrison said, not unkindly. But for now, you will remain silent. Mr. Ashford, continue. The lawyer smiled thinly. As you can see, Your Honor, the children have been taught to speak disrespectfully. Further evidence of the corrupting influence Mr. Graves has exerted during their time in his care. He returned to his table and picked up a sheet of paper. We have witnesses who will testify to seeing Mr. Graves and Mrs. Pierce in conversation prior to her disappearance, suggesting premeditation. We have witnesses who will testify to Mrs. Pierce's flirtatious nature and discontented temperament. And we have Mr. Pierce himself, who will describe the devoted marriage that was destroyed by another man's interference. Mr. Ashford, Judge Morrison interrupted, you keep saying taken against her will. Are you suggesting Mrs. Pierce was physically carried off? Perhaps not physically, Your Honor, but emotionally and psychologically manipulated to the same effect. A woman who has just given birth is in a vulnerable state. I'm not vulnerable. I'm angry. Every head in the room turned toward Evelyn, who'd risen to her feet without consciously deciding to do so. Samuel reached for her hand, but she stepped away, moving toward the center of the room. Mrs. Pierce, the judge said, his tone a warning, you'll have your turn to speak? No, Evelyn said, and her voice carried a strength she hadn't known she possessed. No, I'll speak now, because I'm tired of men deciding when I'm allowed to use my own voice. Mrs. Pierce, Ashford began, but she cut him off. You stand there in your fancy suit talking about how I was manipulated and confused, like I'm some simple-minded creature who can't make her own decisions. But I'll tell you what actually happened that night, and you can decide for yourself who the monster is. Judge Morrison should have silenced her, should have demanded she wait her turn. But something in Evelyn's bearing, the raw fury mixed with desperate courage, made him lean back in his chair and gesture for her to continue. I gave birth to my 3rd daughter on October 15th, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. And when my husband came home and learned I'd given him another girl instead of a son, he beat me unconscious. He beat me while I held a newborn baby. He beat me until blood pooled beneath my cheek and I couldn't see out of one eye. And then he left me there, on the dirt floor of our shack, and went back to the saloon to drink away his disappointment. The courtroom had gone utterly silent, Even Caleb sat motionless, his face unreadable. Samuel Graves didn't kidnap me, Evelyn continued. He saved me. He offered safety when I had none, kindness when I'd forgotten what it felt like, hope when I thought I'd die without ever knowing it again. And if that's a crime, if choosing life over slow death is something this court wants to punish, then I'll accept that punishment, but I won't lie. Not anymore. Not ever again. She turned to face Caleb directly, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. You want to talk about marriage vows? About sacred bonds and wifely duty? Her voice dropped to something low and dangerous. You broke those vows the first time you raised your hand to me. You shattered them every time you told our daughters they were mistakes for being born female. You destroyed them when you chose whiskey and violence over love and family. So don't you dare stand there and pretend to be the wounded party. Don't you dare claim I'm the one who failed our marriage. Caleb's face had gone red, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Ashford laid a restraining hand on his client's arm, but Evelyn wasn't finished. And you, she said, turning her fury on the lawyer. You talk about my flirtatious nature like wanting basic human dignity is the same as infidelity. You talk about my discontented temperament like not wanting to be beaten is some kind of character flaw. Well, I am discontented. I'm discontented with a world where women are treated as property, where children are valued based on their gender, where men like Caleb can terrorize their families without consequence, while men like Samuel are punished for showing basic human decency. She swept her gaze across the packed courtroom, meeting the eyes of everyone present. You all knew what was happening in that shack. You heard my screams. You saw my bruises. And you did nothing, because it was easier to look away than to admit that maybe, just maybe, the law was wrong. That maybe women deserve better than to be legal slaves to whatever man signs a marriage certificate. Judge Morrison finally found his voice. Mrs. Pierce, that's quite enough. No, it's not, Evelyn said, and there were tears streaming down her face now, hot and furious. It's not nearly enough. Because tomorrow you're going to make a decision that will determine whether my daughters grow up knowing they have value, or whether they grow up believing that being female means accepting cruelty as the natural order of things. And I need you to understand, really understand, what's at stake here. She moved to where Sarah and Margaret sat, placing a hand on each girl's shoulder. These are my daughters. Sarah is 7 years old, and she's learning to read because Samuel Graves takes the time to teach her. Margaret is 5, and she's learning to draw because someone finally told her that art and beauty and self-expression are rights, not privileges. And Grace, her voice broke. Grace is barely 2 weeks old, and she's never once been called a mistake, because in Samuel's house, all children are valued equally. Evelyn looked back at the judge, her vision blurring but her voice clear. So when you make your decision, Your Honor, I want you to think about what you're really deciding. Are you deciding whether I broke the law by leaving my husband, or are you deciding whether the law itself is worth following when it protects monsters and punishes victims? Because those are two very different questions, and the answer to one doesn't necessarily answer the other. She returned to her seat, her legs suddenly weak, and Samuel's hand found hers beneath the table. He squeezed once, and she felt the wordless support flow between them. Judge Morrison was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Ashford, call your first witness. The hearing stretched on for hours. Ashford called Tom Barlow's wife, who testified to seeing Evelyn smile at Samuel during a town social 6 months prior, proof, supposedly, of their illicit relationship. He called Frank Jessup, who claimed he'd witnessed Samuel and Evelyn in intimate conversation near the creek 2 days before she disappeared, though under cross-examination from Doc Matheson, acting as impromptu counsel, he admitted they'd been 20 feet away and speaking in normal tones about the weather. Then Caleb himself took the stand, and Evelyn had to watch as he painted a picture of devoted husband driven to occasional drinking by the stress of failed crops and economic hardship. He claimed Evelyn had grown increasingly distant and cold, refusing her wifely duties and filling their daughters' heads with notions of independence. He spoke of coming home that fateful night to find her and the children simply gone, and the terror that had seized him. I thought they were dead, Caleb said, his voice breaking in what seemed like genuine emotion. I thought something terrible had happened. And then I learned they were with Graves, and I was relieved at first. Relieved they were safe. But then I realized what he'd done. Turned my own wife against me. Poisoned my children's minds. And I knew I had to get them back. Had to restore my family. It was a masterful performance, and Evelyn could see it working on some of the spectators. Caleb had always been good at lying when sober, at playing the victim when it suited him. But then Doc Matheson began his questioning, and the facade started to crack. Mr. Pierce, you testified that you occasionally drank due to economic stress. Can you define occasionally? I don't know. Once or twice a week? Witnesses have testified seeing you drunk nearly every night at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Would you say they're lying? They're exaggerating. I see. And these drinking sessions, did they ever lead to arguments with your wife? Sometimes. Marriage is hard, Doc. You know that. Did these arguments ever become physical? Caleb's jaw clenched. I may have raised my voice. I asked if they became physical, Mr. Pierce. Did you ever strike your wife? A pause. Then, she provoked me sometimes. A man can only take so much nagging. That's a yes, then. You struck her. How many times would you estimate? I don't keep count of more than 10 times, more than 50. I said I don't. Did you beat your wife the night she gave birth to your third daughter? The courtroom went so quiet that Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. Caleb looked at his lawyer, who gave a subtle shake of his head, but the damage was done. The pause had been too long, the hesitation too obvious. I was upset, Caleb finally said. Another girl when I needed sons to work the land. Any man would have beaten a woman who'd just given birth? Doc Matheson's voice dripped with disgust. Is that truly your defense? That's enough, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Pierce, you may step down. What followed was a parade of witnesses on Evelyn's behalf. Martha Clemens described the condition she'd found Evelyn in that night, bruised, bleeding, barely conscious. Mrs. Henderson testified to seeing Evelyn at the ranch and noting her obvious fear whenever Caleb's name was mentioned. The preacher's wife spoke of the change in the girls, how they'd gone from frightened and withdrawn to curious and engaged in just 2 weeks of living with Samuel. And then it was Sarah and Margaret's turn. Evelyn wanted to spare them, wanted to tell the judge they'd said enough already. But Samuel leaned close and whispered, "They need to do this, for themselves as much as for you." Sarah went first, climbing into the witness chair with her back straight and her chin lifted. She looked so small up there, so fragile, but her voice was clear when she spoke. Judge Morrison softened his typically stern demeanor. "Sarah, I know this is frightening, but I need you to answer some questions for me. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good girl. Now, can you tell me about your home life before you came to live with Mr. Graves?" Sarah took a breath. "Papa drank a lot, almost every night. And when he drank, he got mean. He'd yell at Mama, call her terrible names, and sometimes he'd hit her. We'd hear it from our room, the sound of his fist hitting her, and her crying, and him telling her she was worthless." Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Caleb stared straight ahead, his face like stone. "Did your father ever hurt you or your sister?" the judge asked gently. "He locked us in the root cellar sometimes. When we made too much noise, or when Mama tried to protect us from his anger. It was dark down there, and cold, and there were spiders. Margaret would cry and cry, but nobody came. Not until he sobered up enough to remember we were there." Margaret's testimony was briefer, but no less damning. She spoke in a small, trembling voice about going to bed hungry most nights, about her father saying she was a mistake, about the fear that lived in their house like a fourth child. "Do you want to go back?" Judge Morrison asked her. "No, sir," Margaret said immediately. "I'd rather die than go back. Mr. Samuel says we're valuable just as we are. Papa never said that. Papa said we ruined his life just by being born." When both girls had finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Caleb's. He sat motionless, his face unreadable, while his daughter's words hung in the air like an indictment. Finally, Judge Morrison called for closing statements. Ashford made a last attempt to salvage his case, arguing that no matter the circumstances, the law was clear. Wives and children belong to their husbands and fathers unless proven otherwise. He urged the judge to see past the emotional testimony and focus on legal precedent. But when Doc Matheson rose to speak on Evelyn's behalf, his voice carried the weight of moral certainty. Your Honor, Mr. Ashford is right about one thing. The law is clear, but laws can be wrong. Laws can be unjust. And when a law requires us to send a woman and 3 children back into the hands of their abuser simply because a piece of paper says he owns them, then that law needs to be challenged. He gestured to Evelyn, to her daughters. These aren't property, they're people. And people have the right to safety, to dignity, to a life free from terror. If this court rules that legal marriage supersedes basic human rights, then what are we really saying? That violence is acceptable as long as it happens within the confines of a home? That women and children are second-class citizens whose welfare matters less than a man's pride? The doctor's voice rose with passion. This case isn't just about Evelyn Pierce and her daughters. It's about every woman in this territory who's trapped in a violent marriage, every child who's learned that might makes right, every person who's ever wondered if the law exists to protect them or to protect their oppressors. Your decision today will echo far beyond this courtroom, Your Honor. Choose wisely. Judge Morrison sat back in his chair, his expression grave. This court will take a 30-minute recess to consider the evidence presented. All parties will remain in the building. The wait was excruciating. Evelyn paced in the small anteroom where Samuel had taken her and the girls, her mind spinning through every possible outcome. What if they lost? What if the judge ruled for Caleb? What if— Stop, Samuel said gently, catching her hand. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. All of us. When they were finally called back, the courtroom was so tense that Evelyn felt like she could barely breathe. Judge Morrison sat behind his desk, a single sheet of paper in his hands. I've listened carefully to the testimony presented here today, he began, and I must admit, this is one of the most difficult decisions I've been asked to make in my 20 years on the bench. The law, as Mr. Ashford correctly noted, is clear in matters of marriage and parental rights. But the spirit of the law, the reason we have laws at all, is to protect people and ensure justice. He paused, and Evelyn felt Samuel's hand tighten around hers. I find that Mrs. Pierce did not, in fact, abandon her husband without cause. Rather, she fled a dangerous situation to protect herself and her children. I further find that Mr. Pierce's testimony, when examined critically, reveals a pattern of violence and abuse that constitutes a clear threat to the welfare of his wife and daughters. Hope flared in Evelyn's chest, but she was afraid to believe it. However, the judge continued, and her heart sank, I am bound by territorial law, which clearly states that a wife cannot legally separate from her husband without his consent or proof of adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty that endangers her life. The courtroom erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked 3 times before order was restored. Let me finish, he said sternly. The evidence presented today demonstrates all 3 conditions. Mrs. Pierce's life was endangered by her husband's violence. He essentially abandoned his family by spending his time and money in saloons rather than providing for his household. And while adultery was alleged, no proof whatsoever was offered. Indeed, all testimony suggests that both Mrs. Pierce and Mr. Graves conducted themselves with propriety. He looked directly at Evelyn. Therefore, I am granting you a legal separation from Caleb Pierce, effective immediately. You are no longer bound by marriage to him, and he has no legal claim to your person or your labor. Furthermore, I am granting you sole custody of your 3 daughters, with the stipulation that Mr. Pierce may request supervised visitation after a period of no less than 6 months, during which he must demonstrate sustained sobriety and completion of work with a counselor regarding his violent tendencies. The courtroom exploded in noise, some cheering, others shouting in protest. Caleb shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You can't do this," he roared. "She's my wife. Those are my daughters. You have no right." "I have every right," Judge Morrison said coldly. "And if you continue to threaten or harass Mrs. Pierce or her children, I will see you jailed for contempt. Do I make myself clear?" Caleb looked ready to launch himself over the table, but Ashford and Frank Jessup grabbed his arms, restraining him. His eyes found Evelyn's across the room, and the hatred there was absolute. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Do you hear me? This isn't over." But Judge Morrison's gavel came down one final time. This hearing is concluded. Mrs. Pierce, you and your daughters are free to go. Free. The word echoed in Evelyn's mind as Samuel swept her into a careful hug, as her daughters clung to her skirts, as the courtroom devolved into chaos around them. Free. After 8 years of marriage, after countless beatings, after believing she'd die in that shack without ever knowing what freedom felt like. She was free. They hurried from this courthouse before Caleb could cause more trouble, Doc Matheson ushering them toward the wagon. People called out congratulations and curses in equal measure. Mrs. Henderson pressed a basket of food into Samuel's hands. The preacher's wife promised to visit soon, and through it all, Evelyn moved as if in a dream, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare was finally over. It wasn't until they were halfway back to the ranch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold across the desert, that reality began to settle in. She turned to Samuel, who was driving the wagon with steady hands and a quiet smile on his face. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Samuel glanced at her, his eyes warm in the fading light. "Now? Now you figure out who you want to be when you're not just surviving. Now your daughters grow up knowing they matter. Now we all get to find out what peace feels like." "And you?" Evelyn asked. "What do you get out of all this?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the road ahead. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I get to see the stars shine through the storm," he said simply. "That's enough for me." Behind them, Sarah and Margaret had fallen asleep in the wagon bed, exhausted by the day's ordeal. Grace dozed peacefully in Evelyn's arms. And ahead, just visible on the horizon, was the ranch, the house with glass windows and a proper door, the barn where a widower played guitar and told stories about stars that never died, the creek where children could laugh without fear. Home. Not just shelter, but home. A place where being female wasn't a crime, where children were treasured, where kindness existed without conditions. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the tears come. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously like joy. She was free, and for the first time in her life, she was learning what it meant to truly live. Winter came to the Arizona desert with surprising gentleness, bringing cold nights and crystalline mornings when frost turned the world silver. The seasons seemed to be marking time alongside Evelyn's transformation, each passing week carrying her further from the woman who'd knelt bleeding on a dirt floor and closer to someone she was only beginning to recognize. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and life at the ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too peaceful to trust. Samuel rose before dawn to tend the horses, his breath misting in the cold air as he moved between the barn and corrals. Evelyn cooked breakfast while Sarah and Margaret practiced their letters at the kitchen table, their voices rising and falling as they sounded out words from Mrs. Henderson's primers. Grace grew fat and content, her eyes tracking movement with increasing awareness, her small hands reaching for everything within grasp. But beneath the surface calm, Evelyn carried a tension she couldn't quite shake. She found herself listening for hoofbeats in the night, checking the horizon for riders, flinching at sudden noises. Caleb hadn't returned, hadn't even been seen in Buckskin since the hearing, according to Doc Matheson's reports, but his absence felt less like peace and more like the held breath before a storm. Samuel noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You're still waiting for him to come back," he said one evening as they cleaned up after supper, the girls already tucked into bed. It wasn't a question. Evelyn's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Am I that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention." Samuel dried a plate with methodical care, not looking at her. "You check the road every time you hear a sound. You won't sit with your back to the door. And you haven't slept through a full night since we got back from town." "I keep thinking about what he said," Evelyn admitted quietly. "That it wasn't over. What if he's just waiting, planning something worse?" Samuel set down the plate and turned to face her fully. "Evelyn, look at me." She did, reluctantly. "Caleb's a coward. And cowards don't plan elaborate revenge. They lash out in the moment, then slink away when someone stands up to them. He was humiliated in front of the whole town, lost his case, lost you and the girls. That kind of blow to a man's pride, it doesn't inspire cunning. It inspires drinking and self-pity." "You don't know that," Evelyn said. You don't know what he's capable of. Neither do you anymore, Samuel interrupted gently. You only know what he was capable of when you were trapped and powerless. But you're not that person now. And he knows it. Everyone knows it. You stood up in that courtroom and told the truth about him. Consequences be damned. That's not someone he can control anymore. Evelyn wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But fear had lived in her bones for so long that evicting it felt impossible. What if I'm never not afraid? She whispered. What if this is just who I am now, someone who jumps at shadows and can't trust peace when she finds it? Samuel moved closer, and Evelyn was struck by how natural his presence had become, how she no longer tensed when he approached. Then we work on it together, day by day, until the good days outnumber the bad ones, until you can sleep through the night without nightmares, until you can sit on the porch and watch the sunset without wondering if it's your last one. That sounds like a lifetime's worth of work, Evelyn said, attempting a smile. Good thing we've got time, then. The way he said it, casual but weighted with meaning, made Evelyn's heart skip. They'd been so careful around each other these past months, maintaining proper distance, avoiding anything that might appear improper to the few townspeople who visited. Samuel still slept in the barn most nights, though he'd finally agreed to use the spare room when the temperature dropped below freezing. They worked side by side, ate meals together, raised the girls as a team, but always with an invisible line between them, a line that Evelyn was starting to resent. Samuel, she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. I've been thinking. A knock at the door cut her off, sharp and urgent. Both of them froze, old instincts kicking in. Samuel moved toward the rifle above the mantel, but before he could reach it, a familiar voice called out. Samuel, Evelyn, it's Martha Clemens. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Samuel opened the door to find the midwife standing in the cold, her face pale and drawn. Martha, what's wrong? It's Caleb, Martha said, her words tumbling out in a rush. He's dead. Found him this morning in the back room of the Silver Dollar. Drank himself to death, the doc says. His liver finally gave out. The world tilted sideways. Evelyn gripped the back of a chair to steady herself, her mind unable to process what she'd just heard. Dead. Caleb was dead. Are you sure? Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Doc Matheson examined the body himself, there's no doubt. Martha's eyes found Evelyn's. I thought you should know before the gossip starts spreading. Some folks are already saying you killed him, that the shame of losing in court drove him to drink himself to death. I wanted you to hear the truth from someone who was there. I didn't, Evelyn started, but her voice failed her. Guilt crashed over her in waves, irrational but overwhelming. Had she killed him? Not with her hands, but with her defiance? Was his death on her conscience now, another weight to carry? Evelyn, no! Samuel was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders. Don't you dare take responsibility for his choices. Caleb drank because that's what he did. He'd been drinking himself to death for years. You just weren't around to watch the final act. But if I hadn't left, then he would have eventually killed you, Samuel said firmly. Or one of the girls. Or he would have drunk himself to death anyway, and you would have been there to take the blame and the shame. This isn't your fault. His death is on him, same as everything else he did. Martha nodded vigorously. Samuel's right. I've been birthing babies in this territory for 30 years, and I've seen men like Caleb Pierce before. They're born broken, or they get broken early, and nothing anyone does can fix them. You tried, Evelyn. God knows you tried longer than most women would have. But some people are determined to destroy themselves, and all you can do is get out of the way before they take you with them. Evelyn sank into the chair, her legs no longer able to hold her. Dead. The word kept echoing in her mind, refusing to take on meaning. The man who'd shaped 8 years of her life, who'd given her 3 daughters and countless scars, who'd been her tormentor and her husband and the monster in all her nightmares, gone. Just like that. What happens now? She asked, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. Do I have to... Is there a funeral? Am I expected to... You're not expected to do anything, Martha said firmly. The town's burying him tomorrow in the paupers section of the cemetery. Some of the saloon folks will be there, I imagine, but nobody expects his widow to attend, especially not after... She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. After everyone knows what he did to me, Evelyn finished. The words felt strange in her mouth, so matter-of-fact, so divorced from the pain they represented. After the whole town heard about how he beat me. After the whole town heard the truth, Samuel corrected. There's a difference. Martha lingered a few more minutes, offering awkward condolences that felt more like congratulations, then left with promises to keep Evelyn informed of any developments. When the door closed behind her, silence fell over the house like a blanket. Samuel moved to build up the fire, giving Evelyn space to process. She sat motionless, staring at her hands, trying to catalog what she was feeling. Grief? No, not grief exactly. Relief? Closer, but not quite right either. What she felt was something like disorientation, as if the map she'd been using to navigate the world had suddenly proven inaccurate. I thought I'd feel something, she finally said. When it happened, I thought I'd feel relief or vindication or something, but I just feel empty. That's normal, Samuel said, settling into the chair across from her. He was a part of your life for a long time, even if that part was painful. It's okay to need time to adjust. I should tell the girls, Evelyn said, though the thought of it filled her with dread. They should know their father is dead. We can tell them in the morning, Samuel suggested. Let them have one more night of peace before their world shifts again. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the reprieve. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling and popping, Grace's soft breathing audible from the basket beside Evelyn's chair. Samuel? Evelyn said finally. Earlier, before Martha came, I was trying to say something. I remember. I was going to ask. She took a breath, gathering courage. I was going to ask what happens to us now, you and me. Once the 6 months are up and I'm officially divorced. Once there's no more legal complications or propriety to worry about. Samuel's expression was unreadable in the firelight. What do you want to happen? It was such a simple question, but it struck at the heart of everything. What did she want? For 8 years, her wants had been irrelevant, her desires crushed under Caleb's demands. She'd forgotten how to even ask herself the question. I don't know, she admitted. I know I don't want to leave this place. I know I want the girls to keep learning and growing here. I know I want... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. You want what? Samuel prompted gently. I want to stop living like a guest in someone else's life, Evelyn said, the truth tumbling out before she could stop it. I want to feel like I belong somewhere, with someone. I want to stop being afraid that kindness is temporary, that safety is an illusion, that any moment now you're going to realize we're more trouble than we're worth and ask us to leave. Evelyn, I know it's foolish, she continued, unable to stop now that she'd started. I know you didn't sign up for a ready-made family. You were just trying to help a stranger, and now you're stuck with 3 children and a woman who's so damaged she can't even... Stop. Samuel's voice was firm but not harsh. He moved from his chair to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me carefully. You are not damaged. You are not too much trouble. And you could never be something I'm stuck with. Do you understand? Evelyn shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. You don't have to say that. You don't have to... I'm not saying it because I have to, Samuel interrupted. I'm saying it because it's true. Evelyn, these past 4 months, having you and the girls here, it's brought this house back to life. Anna's been gone 3 years, and in that time, I've just been existing, going through the motions. But you changed that. You all changed that. He reached up to wipe a tear from her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. I'm not stuck with you. I'm grateful for you. Every day I wake up grateful that Martha Clemens had enough conscience to send me to that shack. Grateful that you were brave enough to trust a stranger. Grateful that I get to watch your daughters learn to laugh without fear, to see you remember how to dream about a future that doesn't include violence. But what does that mean? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. For us? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn could see him choosing his words carefully. It means whatever you want it to mean. If you want to stay here as friends, as partners in raising the girls, then that's what we'll be. If you want something more, eventually, when you're ready, well, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. You have. The question came out more surprised than Evelyn intended. A smile tugged at Samuel's lips. Evelyn, you're beautiful and strong and brave as hell. Of course, I've thought about it, but I've also watched you flinch every time I move too quickly, seen you watching the road for Caleb's return, noticed how you still can't quite believe that kindness doesn't come with a price tag attached. And I know that you need time to heal before anything else can even be considered. What if I never fully heal? Evelyn asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if parts of me are always going to be broken? Then we work around the broken parts, Samuel said simply. Evelyn, nobody comes to love undamaged. We all carry scars. The question isn't whether you're perfect, it's whether you're willing to keep trying. And from where I'm standing, you've been trying harder than anyone I've ever known. The word love hung in the air between them, weighty and terrifying and impossibly sweet. Neither of them acknowledged it directly, but Evelyn felt it settle into her chest like a seed planted in fertile ground. I need time, she said finally. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not somebody's wife or somebody's victim. I need to learn what I want, what I dream about, who I might become. Is that okay? More than okay, Samuel said, squeezing her hands before releasing them and standing. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. That night, Evelyn lay awake in the darkness, Grace sleeping peacefully beside her, and her older daughters curled together in the other bed. She thought about Caleb, dead in a saloon back room, his life ending the way he'd lived it, soaked in whiskey and regret. She thought about the girl she'd been when she married him, barely 18 and full of naive hopes about what marriage would bring. She thought about the woman she'd become over 8 years of survival, how she'd learned to make herself small and quiet and invisible. And she thought about the woman she might still become, here in this house, with this man who sang about stars and taught her daughters that being female was something to celebrate rather than apologize for. Sleep came eventually, and for the first time since Martha's news, Evelyn slept through until morning without waking once in fear. Telling the girls about their father's death was one of the hardest things Evelyn had ever done. She gathered them at the kitchen table after breakfast, Grace in her lap, and tried to find words that would convey the truth without traumatizing them further. Your papa died yesterday, she said simply, unable to find a gentle way to soften it. He drank too much, and his body couldn't take it anymore. Sarah's face went very still, processing. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, though Evelyn suspected they were more about the idea of death than grief for Caleb specifically. Does that mean he can't hurt us anymore? Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. The question broke Evelyn's heart even as it confirmed what she'd always known. Her daughters had been just as afraid as she was. No, sweetheart, he can't hurt anyone anymore. Are we supposed to be sad? Margaret asked, confused. Mrs. Henderson said we should honor our parents. But Papa was so mean. Is it wrong that I'm not crying? Samuel, who'd been standing in the doorway, moved closer. It's not wrong to feel however you feel. Your papa was your father, and that's complicated. He gave you life, but he also hurt you and your mother. It's okay to have mixed feelings. It's okay to be sad or relieved or confused or all of those things at once. I'm glad he's gone, Sarah said suddenly, fiercely. Does that make me bad? No, Evelyn said, pulling both girls close. That makes you honest. And there's nothing wrong with being glad you're safe. They talked for over an hour, the girls asking questions that ranged from practical to philosophical. What would happen to their old house? Were they orphans now? Did this mean they could stay at the ranch forever? To that last question, Evelyn looked at Samuel, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, she said. We can stay here as long as Mr. Samuel will have us. Forever then, Margaret said with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old, because Mr. Samuel loves us. I can tell. Samuel's ears went red, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he suggested they all take a walk down to the creek, get some fresh air and movement to process the heavy news. The girls ran ahead, and Evelyn found herself walking beside Samuel in comfortable silence. They're going to be okay, Samuel said eventually. They're stronger than you think. They're stronger than they should have to be, Evelyn corrected. No child should have to be grateful their father is dead. No, Samuel agreed. But they are grateful, and they're safe, and that has to be enough. You can't change the past. You can only build a better future. The winter months that followed were marked by small, quiet transformations. Evelyn began teaching herself to read more advanced texts, working through Samuel's collection of books with increasing confidence. She discovered she had a talent for numbers, helping Samuel with his ranch accounts and finding satisfaction in making the columns balance. The girls thrived under Mrs. Henderson's tutoring, advancing so quickly that the school teacher suggested they might be ready to attend the one-room schoolhouse in town by spring. But it was the small domestic moments that revealed the deepest changes. Evelyn learning to laugh again, really laugh, until her sides hurt and tears streamed down her face. Margaret discovering that she could draw not just horses but people, her sketches growing more sophisticated with each attempt. Sarah reading entire books on her own, then discussing them with Samuel like a tiny scholar. Grace growing into a happy, chubby baby who smiled at everyone and never once heard herself called a mistake. And through it all, Samuel was there, steady, patient, kind. He taught Evelyn to ride a horse, his hands careful when he lifted her into the saddle. He played his guitar every evening, the music becoming the soundtrack of their lives. He fixed broken things and built new ones, his capable hands always busy, always creating rather than destroying. They fell into a partnership that felt more real than any legal marriage Evelyn had known. They made decisions together, divided labor fairly, supported each other through hard days, and celebrated small victories. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the careful distance between them began to close. It happened in increments, Samuel's hand lingering on Evelyn's elbow when he helped her down from the wagon. Evelyn touching Samuel's shoulder in passing, a gesture of affection rather than need. Their conversations growing longer, ranging from practical matters to hopes and dreams, and the kind of deep, searching questions that only came when you trusted someone with your true self. Spring arrived with explosive color, wildflowers carpeting the desert in brilliant yellows and reds and purples. The apple tree behind the house, which had been bare and dormant all winter, suddenly burst into bloom, its branches heavy with white and pink blossoms. Evelyn stood beneath it one morning, marveling at the transformation. Samuel found her there, his hands dusted with flour from making breakfast. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, moving to stand beside her. "Anna planted this tree the first year we were married. She said every home needed something beautiful that bloomed. Something to remind you that winter always ends." "She was right," Evelyn said softly. The petals drifted down like snow, catching in her hair and on her shoulders. "Evelyn," Samuel said, and something in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "I've been thinking. About us. About the future." Her heart began to beat faster. And I know I said I'd give you all the time you needed, and I meant it. I still mean it. But I also think maybe it's time I was honest about what I'm hoping for, so you can decide if it's something you might want too. "I'm listening," Evelyn said, barely breathing. Samuel took a breath, clearly gathering his courage. "I want to marry you, not because it's proper, or because the town expects it, or because you need a provider, but because I've fallen in love with you, with your strength and your courage, and the way you read to your daughters every night, with how you hum while you cook, and how you're teaching yourself arithmetic just because you can, with your laughter and your fierce determination and the way you're slowly learning to trust again." He took her hands in his, and Evelyn could feel them trembling slightly. "I want to stand with you under this tree and make promises that actually mean something. I want to raise your daughters as if they were my own, not because you need help, but because I love them and want to be their father in truth, not just in practice. I want to build a life with you, Evelyn, a real one based on choice and respect and partnership." Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face, but for once they weren't tears of pain. "I'm still broken in places," she whispered. "I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch at sudden movements. I still don't fully understand how to be in a relationship where kindness is the foundation instead of fear." "Then we'll learn together," Samuel said simply. "Evelyn, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be willing, to try, to build something new with me, even if we stumble sometimes." Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been, beaten down, hopeless, convinced her only value lay in survival. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, braver, learning to dream again. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, I'll marry you, not because I need to, but because I want to. Because you've shown me what love actually looks like, and I want more of it. I want a lifetime of it. Samuel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close, and Evelyn let herself lean into his embrace without fear, without reservation, without waiting for the blow that never came. When? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Soon, Evelyn said. But let's do it right. Not because it's expected or required, but because we're choosing it. Let's make it mean something. They planned the wedding for 3 months later, giving Evelyn time to be officially divorced and to make sure this was what she truly wanted rather than just trading one dependency for another. Doc Matheson and Mrs. Henderson stood as witnesses. Martha Clemens made Evelyn's dress, simple muslin, but beautifully sewn with tiny embroidered flowers around the neckline. The preacher's wife helped the girls create a patchwork veil from scraps of fabric, each piece representing something meaningful. Anna's quilts, Sarah's first primer, Margaret's art paper, Grace's baby blanket. On the morning of the wedding, Evelyn stood in the bedroom she'd shared with her daughters for 6 months, looking at herself in the mirror. The bruises had long since faded. The split lip had healed without a scar. The physical evidence of Caleb's violence had vanished, leaving only a woman with laugh lines beginning to form around her eyes and a confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there before. Sarah and Margaret burst in, their faces flushed with excitement. They wore matching dresses that Mrs. Henderson had made, and their hair was plaited with wildflowers. "Mama, you look so pretty!" Margaret exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, more perceptive than her years. "A little," Evelyn admitted, "but good nervous, excited nervous." "Do you love Mr. Samuel?" Margaret asked with a child's directness. Evelyn smiled, the truth of it settling into her bones. "Yes, I do. Very much." "Good," Sarah said firmly, "because he loves you too, and he loves us, and that's what makes a real family, isn't it? Love instead of what we had before." Evelyn pulled both girls close, breathing in their sun-warmed scent. That's exactly what makes a family. Love and choice and respect and kindness. The ceremony took place beneath the apple tree, which was still blooming despite the advancing spring. It was a small gathering, just Doc Matheson, Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, Martha Clemens, and a handful of townspeople who'd supported Evelyn through her darkest days. Sarah and Margaret stood on either side of their mother, Grace cradled in Mrs. Henderson's arms. Samuel waited beneath the branches, and when Evelyn saw him, her breath caught. He wore his Sunday clothes, his hair neatly combed, his weathered face alight with joy. But what struck her most was the way he looked at her, not with possession or expectation, but with wonder and gratitude and love that asked for nothing except the chance to give. She walked toward him on her own, no father to give her away because she wasn't property to be transferred. She walked as a free woman, making a free choice, and the symbolism of it made her eyes sting with tears. When she reached Samuel, he took her hands in his, and the preacher began the ceremony. But before the official words started, Samuel spoke. "I want to make some promises," he said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "Not just the standard vows, but real promises. Specific ones." Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. "I promise to never raise my hand to you in anger," Samuel said. "I promise to value your voice and your choices. I promise to love your daughters as if they were born of my blood. I promise to work beside you as an equal partner, not above you as a master. I promise to keep singing when times are hard, to keep hoping when hope seems foolish, and to keep showing up every day to build this life with you." He squeezed her hands. "And I promise that when you have nightmares or hard days or moments when you forget that you're free now, I'll be patient. I'll remind you. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to fully believe that this is real and lasting and good." Evelyn's tears were flowing freely now. "I promise," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "to be brave enough to trust you, to work every day to let go of the fear that love is just a trap. I promise to be a partner, not a subordinate, to raise our daughters," she paused, loving the sound of that, "our daughters to know their worth. I promise to keep trying, even when it's hard, to keep growing, even when growth is painful. and I promise to love you with everything I have, because you taught me what real love looks like." The preacher said the official words then, and they exchanged rings, simple silver bands that Samuel had hammered himself in his workshop, the metal smooth and warm. When the preacher pronounced them married, Samuel cupped Evelyn's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget every rough, demanding kiss Caleb had ever forced on her. This was different. This was a question and an answer, a promise and a celebration, a beginning rather than an ending. The girls cheered and Grace wailed as if in celebration, and their small gathering applauded. Doc Matheson produced a bottle of wine he'd been saving, and they toasted under the apple blossoms while Sarah and Margaret chased each other around the tree in dizzy spirals of joy. The rest of the day passed in a blur of food and laughter and music. Samuel played his guitar, while Mrs. Henderson sang old hymns in a surprisingly beautiful voice. Margaret drew pictures of everyone, her artistic eye capturing not just what they looked like, but how they felt, the joy and relief and hope that seemed to shimmer in the air itself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, the guests began to leave. Doc Matheson was last, pausing to grip Samuel's shoulder and kiss Evelyn's cheek. "You did good," he told them both. "You found each other when you needed it most, and you built something real. That's rare and precious. Don't take it for granted." "We won't," Evelyn promised. After he'd gone, Samuel began cleaning up while Evelyn put the exhausted girls to bed. They fell asleep within minutes, worn out from excitement and dancing and eating too many of Martha's sweet cakes. Evelyn returned to the main room to find Samuel standing by the fire, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He offered her one with a smile. "Mrs. Graves," he said, testing out her new name. "Mrs. Graves," Evelyn repeated, and the name felt like freedom rather than imprisonment. "I like the sound of that." They stood together in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching the fire. After a while, Samuel spoke. "I was thinking," he said quietly. "That first night you came here, I told you about the star that never dies, do you remember?" "I remember," Evelyn said. "You sang about it while we tried to fall asleep in a stranger's house." "I've been singing that song for 3 years," Samuel continued, "ever since Anna died. It was my way of reminding myself that some things endure even when everything else falls apart. But lately, I've realized something." "What's that?" "You're the star," Samuel said simply. "You and the girls. You came through the darkest storm imaginable, and you didn't let it extinguish you. You kept shining, and now you're teaching your daughters to do the same." Evelyn set down her tea and moved closer to him, resting her head against his shoulder. "We're shining together now. All of us. That's the real magic of it. We don't have to be stars alone anymore." Samuel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "No more sleeping in the barn?" he asked with gentle humor. "No more barn," Evelyn confirmed. "You're stuck with me now, in your house, in your bed, in your life." "Best thing I've ever been stuck with," Samuel said, and kissed the top of her head. That night, for the first time, Evelyn shared a bed with a man without fear. Samuel held her gently, asking permission before every touch, respecting boundaries she hadn't even known she needed to set. They talked late into the night about dreams and plans and the future they would build together. And when Evelyn finally drifted off to sleep, secure in Samuel's arms with her daughters sleeping safely in the next room, she dreamed not of violence or escape, but of apple blossoms falling like snow and a house full of laughter and a life stretching out before her full of possibility. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Sarah grew into a brilliant student who eventually became a teacher herself, educating children across the territory and advocating for women's right to education. Margaret's artistic talent flourished, and her paintings of the desert landscape began to sell in Phoenix and even as far away as San Francisco. Grace grew up knowing only love and respect, and she became a fierce advocate for women's rights, speaking publicly about her mother's courage and the importance of legal protections for families fleeing violence. Evelyn herself discovered talents she'd never known she possessed. She learned bookkeeping and helped Samuel expand his horse breeding operation. She became known throughout the territory for her fair dealing and sharp business sense, and And she mentored other women who found themselves trapped in violent marriages, offering not just sympathy, but practical help, a place to stay, legal advice, the example of someone who'd escaped and thrived. Samuel continued to be exactly what he'd promised, a partner, a friend, a father to her daughters, and a husband who valued her voice and her dreams as much as his own. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, celebrated births and mourned deaths, grew old together with grace and dignity. But more than any specific achievement or milestone, what Evelyn treasured most was the everyday piece of it. The mornings when she woke without fear, the evenings when the family gathered for supper and shared stories of their day, the nights when she fell asleep in Samuel's arms, secure in the knowledge that his love had no conditions attached. 20 years after that first terrible night when she'd fled Buckskin with her daughters, Evelyn stood beneath the apple tree, older now, silvering at the temples, her hands marked with the honest work of a life well lived. The tree had grown massive, its branches spreading wide, its blossoms more abundant than ever. Sarah visited with her own children. Margaret sent paintings from San Francisco. Grace was in Phoenix giving a speech at a women's convention. The house that had once belonged to a grieving widower now rang with multiple generations of laughter. Samuel found her there, his own hair white now, but his smile still as warm as ever. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the blossoms drift down like blessing. "Happy?" he asked. Evelyn leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of him, breathing in the scent of him that had become synonymous with home. "More than I ever thought possible." "Any regrets?" She considered the question seriously, thinking about the girl she'd been, the woman she'd become, the circuitous and painful path between the two. "I regret that it took so long," she finally said. "I regret the years I lost to fear, but I don't regret anything that led me here, to this moment, to this life with you." "Me neither," Samuel said and kissed her temple. "Though I do sometimes wish I'd found you sooner, could have saved you some pain." "Maybe," Evelyn agreed, "or maybe everything happened exactly when it needed to. Maybe I had to go through hell to fully appreciate heaven." They stood under the blooming tree, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. The wind picked up, sending petals swirling around them like snow, and somewhere in the house a grandchild laughed, the sound carrying clear and pure on the spring air. Evelyn had been beaten for birthing daughters, condemned for being female, told her entire life that she was worthless. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. She'd raised 3 remarkable women who knew their value. She'd built a marriage based on equality and respect. She'd proven that women could choose their own paths, define their own worth, create their own happiness. The apple tree bloomed above them, testament to resilience and renewal. And Evelyn Pierce, now Evelyn Graves, stood beneath its branches with her husband by her side, living proof that even the most broken things could be made beautiful again. That winter always ended, that stars kept shining through the storm, that love, when it was real and right and chosen freely, could heal wounds that seemed impossibly deep. She'd been told she was nothing, but she'd become everything that mattered. And that, Evelyn thought as Samuel's hand found hers, and their fingers interlaced with practiced ease, was the greatest victory of all. Not just survival, but joy. Not just escape, but homecoming. Not just endurance, but flourishing. The apple tree bloomed above them, and Evelyn smiled, and the story that had begun with a crime called motherhood ended with a celebration of everything motherhood could be when given the chance to bloom. Beautiful, fierce, unbreakable, free.